On the 24th of May 1970, the Soviet Union started a project that would be known as the Kola Super Deep Borehole. Although it has been long since abandoned, the hole still exists today and measures about 40,000 feet in depth. Be it for research or whatever claim have been told, the Kola borehole is not the only time Russia dug further than they should have, and several holes can still be found today, unprotected in the desolate Russian wilderness. The biggest mistake of my life is going down one of these holes. A year ago, my work took me to a small Russian fishing village located in Siberia. It's a tiny place populated by no more than 200 people, most of them fishermen or hunters. It wasn't the first time being a scientist that got me into strange situations. I'm a geologist, which is not important for the purpose of this story, but I have experience in search and rescue operations back home in the United States. My Russian language abilities were less than satisfactory, and considering only 2 people beside my crew spoke English in the village, it was a challenge to say the least. However, with the right spirit and willingness to share a bottle of vodka, they were some of the friendliest people I'd met in my entire life. I particularly enjoyed the company of the village's only police officer, Vadim, who happened to speak at least a basic level of English. His job mostly consisted of escorting people home after they had a bit too much to drink, although he oftentimes partook in the drinking rather than stopping it. Needless to say, we quickly became good friends. We rather enjoyed ourselves in such a bizarre world, cut off from civilization. At least we did until the 9th month of our deployment. One of the local 7-year-old daughter had gone missing. Her name was Daria, and she had been out playing with her friends around an old abandoned building, widely believed to be a Soviet-era silo. The whole structure had been closed off for almost 40 years and forgotten, yet the children loved hanging out in the area. On that particular day, the silo was open. The doors were broken down, which revealed a large room full of ancient equipment, and a large dark hole in the center. The hole measured about 50 feet in diameter, and the depth was unknown. There was a basic elevator platform in the center of the hole, like something used for descending mines. All that could be seen was endless darkness reaching into the abyss. Daria had fallen into it. I immediately knew in my heart that the fall had killed her. A fall that deep, even if the bottom was a pool of water, it would be lethal. The other children insisted that Daria had called out for help after falling into the hole, which gave out false hope to the terrified mother. It was the first time I had seen Vadim efficiently work to put together a rescue operation. Calling for official aid so far out was a hopeless task. Even if they sent help, they would arrive too late. Seeing as I had some experience in that field, alongside basic first aid, I volunteered, as did one of my colleagues, Stanley. While the mechanics attempted to revive the old machinery, including the elevator, I attached the sinker to a line in hopes of measuring the depth. The line wasn't long enough to determine where the bottom was, even though the longest ropes combined measured almost 1,000 feet. After a couple hours, the mechanics announced that the elevator was ready, but they had found some sort of protective suits. According to the few documents found in the facility, the atmospheric pressure was quite high, and the temperatures reached up to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I knew then we would retrieve nothing but the body of a little girl for the family to bury. "Gotov? Ready?" Vadim asked us. The suits were poorly fitted to our slightly untrained figures, and chafed in places I didn't know it was possible. We entered the lift, which was protected by a rusty metal cage full of holes. We were given only one walkie-talkie to communicate with the people on the surface, in addition to some old flashlights. "We're ready. Lower us down," Stanley said. The gears running the elevator platform started turning. A clunky sound echoed through the room down the hole. There was a small screen on the elevator with numbers signifying the depth. It was an excruciatingly slow process, no more than a foot per second. However, the change in atmosphere was imminent. We descended. 100 feet. Darkness had already enveloped us. The weak flashlights we had brought along hardly provided any comfort. "You think this is dark? Wait till you see winter in village," Vadim said, his usual dull humor. Me and Stanley both faked a chuckle. "Would you please check if the radio works, Vadim?" I asked. "It works. No worries," he responded. 500 feet. The walkie sounded for the first time since our descent almost 10 minutes ago. The Russian was heavy and the static made it incomprehensible to a novice such as myself. "What was that, Vadim?" I asked. "Oh, they just asked how deep we are." "Shouldn't we be able to hear them talking? We're only 500 feet down," Stanley asked. "Yes, something strange here," Vadim said. Other than the electrical hum of the ancient elevator and the sound of Stanley nervously shifting his weight, we couldn't hear the chatter of people just above us. "Very strange," Vadim mumbled to himself. Something about Vadim seemed off. I had never seen him worried like that before. "Guys, is it getting really warm here, or is it just me?" "Yeah, I'm sweating bullets already," I responded, 1,000 feet. "Pogomite!" a soft voice cried out from the depths below. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" "Someone called for help from below." "I hear nothing." I put a finger to my lips, gesturing for silence while listening attentively. Then I heard the voice again. "Help!" The same voice, but slightly louder. "There it was again!" "Yes, I heard it," Vadim said. "Hold on, they called for help?" "Yes, you heard it too?" "Of course, but it was in English." It wasn't too unusual for the children to pick up on an English word or two while we were visiting, but this wasn't that. It didn't make sense for a young girl to know that word. Not in a tiny Siberian village. Vadim called out for the voice, but no one responded. "Damn it! Can we make this thing go any faster?" 4,000 feet. More than an hour had passed and we couldn't see the bottom yet. It had been quite some time since we heard the voice and I had developed a throbbing headache from the heat. If someone had really called out from the bottom, we should have reached it already. "Guys, I see the light," Vadim announced. "What are you talking about?" "Light! At bottom! Look!" He frantically jumped up and down while pointing towards the darkness below. "There's nothing there, Vadim," Stanley said. "How can you not see? It's so bright!" I glanced over at Stanley in confusion. My first thought was that Vadim was going crazy due to the heat and darkness. 5,000 feet. None of us had said a single word since Vadim told us about the light. Our moods were descending much faster than the elevator. On top of that, my headache was almost killing me. Out of nowhere, the elevator stopped, shaking violently in the process. It knocked me straight to the floor and I was out in an instant. A few seconds passed while I came back to it, and I saw Stanley lying unmoving next to me. Vadim, however, was nowhere to be found. "Stan, are you alright?" I shook his shoulder. He grunted as he sat back up. "What the hell just happened?" "I don't know, man, but Vadim's gone." "What? Where'd he go?" "I don't know, he just vanished." We looked around. There was no way out of the elevator, although there were a few holes in the metal cage surrounding us. It would still be impossible for a large man such as Vadim to get through. "Hey, I found the walkie," Stanley said. "Try calling the surface." He called for help, but static was the only response. We tried to call out for Vadim, but he was far gone. The elevator started descending again. "Fuck this! Let's go back up," Stanley pleaded. I clicked a few buttons on the panel. "How? The controls are broken. Only the ones at the surface work." He started screaming for the people up top to bring us back, but we both knew there was no way they could hear us all the way down there. 10,000 feet. It had taken more than 4 hours to get that deep, the heat getting worse for each feet descended. I had already passed out a couple times from dehydration, despite having brought an ample amount of water. "Why haven't they brought us back up yet?" Stanley asked with a weak voice. He was quite a bit older than myself, so he was rapidly deteriorating from the heat. "I don't know. Is it even possible to be this far down?" Stanley didn't respond. He had fallen unconscious, but I lacked the energy to wake him up. I was about to pass out for the 9th time myself. I was only jolted back into consciousness by what sounded like singing. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard in Russian, and I didn't understand what it was about, but it was so serene, so pure. "Stan?" I called out with my fading voice. "Can you hear that?" "Who's singing?" he mumbled, half asleep. A light appeared in the depths, and the singing got louder. "I see it! The light!" I said. The elevator stopped once more. Stan was gone. Just like Vadim, he had vanished into thin air. But the light remained, the beautiful warm light. It started moving towards me, and the closer it got, the more at peace I felt. The light ascended until I saw nothing but brightness surrounding me. Then, there was nothing. I woke up in the hospital 1 week later. I had been found in the middle of a forest in eastern Russia by a pair of hunters. I had no documentation or proof of who I was, and as they claimed, my story didn't add up. No such hole existed according to public records, which wasn't much of a surprise, but when I dug deeper, I realized the village I had stayed in for the better part of a year wasn't even on the map. The ordeal had taken a toll on my mind, leaving several gaps in my memory, though I could recall a few phone numbers from my colleagues. When I called them, their numbers were all either disconnected or reached completely unrelated people. After a lengthy investigation, I was allowed to travel back to the United States on an emergency travel document. My fingerprints matched some documentation of my existence, which helped. Not criminal records, mind you. When I returned home, I discovered that my house was owned by someone else, and had been for at least 10 years. It took me a long time to figure out what had happened, but some changes were too big to be a horrible coincidence. Putting aside the personal changes I've experienced here, even world history doesn't match what I remember studying. Geography is vastly different. Heck, there's an entire continent missing from the map. Denial is a powerful tool. It took me months to come to terms with a very simple, yet complicated fact. This is not the world I belong to. Recall your earliest childhood memory. How old are you in this memory? 4, 5? Developmental neuroscience tells us we do not form episodic memories before the age of 3. Supposedly, memories from before this time are merely phantoms, errors in the brain's memory formation process, ordinary daydreams, mislabeled as fact. This is what the current research tells us. It is important you know this. Bear with me, reader. I'll not waste your time with endless foreplay. Here's my story. I'm a graduate student, studying linguistics. My work often overlaps with that of the neuroscience department, and I have made many contacts there. One such contact is the subject of this story. We will call him DV. DV is also a graduate student. He studies memory. He uses a procedure called transcranial magnetic stimulation. This procedure uses magnetic radiation to activate targeted portions of the brain. Imagine a magic wand you can point at a cluster of neurons and say, "Dance," and they dance. 2 months ago, DV asked me to assist me in a pet project he was developing. He has assisted me in the past when I was learning to use an EEG for my research. I owed him a great deal. I had no choice but to help him in his work. DV is what I have instead of friends. I arrived at his lab after hours, as requested. He was waiting by the door. He was wearing his lab coat. It was far too big for his frame, and swallowed his shoulders. He looked so childlike. "Are you ready?" "Ready for what?" I asked. He had not told me any details about his project. "I just need practice focusing the machine," he said. "I'm targeting the area of the brain no one has targeted with this device before." I consented, with little hesitation. He had happily served as my model subject when I was learning the EEG. Academia is built upon exchange of favors. Besides, his machine doesn't even break the skin. I made myself comfortable in his examination chair. It had leather wrist restraints, but they were never used. I was facing a bay window. The lab was high on the campus hill. The night loomed heavy over the orange city lights. A few cars floated along the highway. "Just try to relax," DV said. His breath was minty, with undercurrents of gin. He turned on the magic wand, and I felt the familiar buzz of electricity on my scalp. The vibrations converged on points just behind my ears, on both sides of my head. The points began to burn. My hair stood on end. "How do you feel?" DV asked. He was whispering, but his voice was thick with anticipation. I think he already knew the answer to his question. Before I could respond, I heard a cry from down the hall. Someone was screaming in the stairwell. Someone was howling like an animal shot through the leg. I heard flesh cracking. I heard tendons popping. I heard a voice choking on words. Someone was vomiting up my name in the stairwell. "I think I need to take a break," I said. I tried to turn to look at TV, but felt hands holding my head in place. I tried to move my hands, but found the wrist straps had been fastened. "How long have I been here?" I asked. No one responded. The moaning down the hall grew closer. Someone was pounding on the doors. They were locked, but the door to the lab wasn't. "Please, turn it off," I said. The current from the machine felt like lightning coursed behind my eyes. The window grew larger. The cars on the road skidded out of control. I watched headlights plunge into the river. I watched headlights careen into each other. The city lights blinked out, one by one. The darkness of the landscape was so thick, I could wade into it. So I did. I was out there, in the void. There was more distance before me than the Earth's horizon provides. I was alone for a precious instant. Then, the darkness was broken by a man. He was the man from the hall. He was a man without skin, muscles and sinew all twitching, veins and arteries all spurting. I could see his heart shrivel in his chest when he looked at me. He was all a slaughterhouse, no humanity. He was so close. I could smell the rotten meat on his silver bones. "Do you remember me?" he said. His teeth were gripped out like a racehorse. His frame was blurry, as if dislodged in time. His mouth looked like a slow exposure photo of a burning carcass. "Yes," I said because I did. When I was young, too young to form memories, I had a dream. In this dream, a man walked behind me and told me things about the universe I didn't want to know. He was a man without skin. He was the man standing before me in the void. He followed me through movie theaters, through city parks, through howling tunnels and unkempt forests and childhood homes, only to find me huddled in the corner of my bedroom closet. He spoke a few words. I don't have words for the things he said. I woke up soon after, drenched in freezing sweat, lips burnt with vomit, eyes sore from rolling in their sockets. My mind tried to reject the memory. I have searched every language for the words I heard that night, but no tongue of man has ever spoken the things I heard. There in the void, there in the lab, the man had found me again. The machine fractured my defenses and let him in. For the second time, he spoke those words. And for the second time, my mind refused to keep them. At some point, what seemed like an eternity later, DV removed the device from my head. As suddenly as waking from a dream, I came to my senses. "How long was I hooked up for?" I asked. "Less than a minute," DV responded. He had lost his tone of knowing. His voice was quiet and trembled as he spoke. "Untie me," I said. I then realized my wrists were not bound. DV was frozen in the corner. I stood up and gathered my belongings. My ears were ringing, each in a different pitch. They were dissonant. They were the last notes of a song I hadn't heard in 20 years. "I'm not coming back," I said. "Please don't contact me." DV nodded. His skin was as white as his lab coat. I walked 5 miles to my home. I didn't trust myself behind the wheel of a car. The night was silent as I walked. Even the crickets were quiet for me. When I got home, I vomited into my bathroom sink. I watched my breakfast, lunch, and dinner circle the sputtering drain. I looked into the mirror. My shirt was drenched in blood, except for a pattern of ribs across the front. The blood was still wet to the touch. My pockets were full of cartilage. My socks were soaked in afterbirth. I threw my clothes in the trash compactor that night. DV and I do not speak. I do not see him on campus. I complete my schoolwork regularly. I pay my rent on time. I fall asleep to talk shows on weeknights, and to whiskey on weekends. I don't do much dreaming nowadays. I especially don't think about my childhood. Somewhere, in the unfathomed recesses of inaccessible memory, there are words that shouldn't be heard. A man without skin chose to tell me those words, and I chose, twice now, not to remember them. At the beginning of this text, I asked you to recall your first memory. I hope it was from when you were 4 or 5. I hope it was simply a memory of your first injury, or something similar. I hope these things, because somewhere in your brain, there is a memory of something your developed brain chose not to remember. I hope these things, because the infinite horror of those forgotten words is too great for the human mind to comprehend. I hope your dreams are blissful, and your nightmares leave you happy to be awake. Most of all, I hope that this story keeps you from exploring those damning and boundless vaults of your mind. When we are born, we have no defenses against this world, physical or mental. Perhaps it takes a few years to build these defenses. Perhaps the things we see before then are better left forgotten. Hello all. I have been contemplating about writing this for a long time. Truth is, I don't know if this is real, or if it's all in my head. Whatever this is, though, has changed me in so many ways, and I now know I'm in danger. We all are. But let's start from the beginning. The first time it happened, I was praying. I had recently lost my grandmother, and I was feeling lost. I decided that I would turn to God to find peace and some answers, and come to terms with her death. The chapel I went to was the one that my grandmother used to take me. It was small and always very quiet. Not many people visited. I decided to go there to feel closer to her. As I walked in, I could see no one in, which made me feel better. I really didn't want to lose it in front of other people. I sat down to enjoy the silence and started praying. Imagine my surprise when in the middle of my prayer, I heard this little voice whispering, "I hear you." I jumped up and looked around. I was clearly alone and I could not locate the source of the voice. I decided that it was a figment of my imagination and continued to pray. 5 minutes later, though, the voice came stronger. "You shouldn't be doing that." It was right next to my ear. So close it made the hairs on my neck stand up and sent shivers down my spine. As I turned around, I came face to face with a girl. She couldn't have been older than me, maybe 16, 17. She was wearing this red dress and she was barefoot. Her hair was the darkest black I've ever seen, and her eyes the same. I started screaming, but at the same time, I was mesmerized by her beauty. "Shh," she said, putting her hand on her mouth. "Do you want Father to hear us?" Her touch was soothing and not threatening in any way. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to fight back tears. "I am the devil," she said. "The first unwanted." I started trembling, fearing this was the end of me. She moved closer, and as if reading my mind, she said, "Don't worry, my child. I won't hurt you. I'm not the one you should be afraid of. I've come to warn you, as I have done with so many others." A sudden noise, like whistling, made her stop talking, and I could see fear in her eyes. I tried to locate the source of the sound, and by the time I turned around to face her, she was gone. Only her scent lingered. This lovely lavender scent. I stayed there, not moving, trying to listen for what felt like hours. I was sure I was going crazy, and convinced myself this was all due to grief and lack of sleep. But as I closed the door behind me to head to my car, I heard her whisper again, "Be careful." It had been a week since the incident, and I had almost forgotten about it. I could hear the occasional whisper and catch a glimpse of something red in the corner of my eye, but never something specific. Fate would have it, I had to go and pick up my mom from the bus station, and only way there, yes, you guessed it, was past the road with the chapel. The drive was uneventful until I got to the crossing in front of the chapel. I was getting nervous remembering what had happened, so I turned the radio on louder and tried to find a relaxing song. And that's when it came. The smell. The frickin' lavender smell. I looked up from the radio, and there she was. She was standing in front of the car. She looked exactly as she had before, but different at the same time. Older. Tired. I screamed and got out of the car. I started running in the field behind me. I was losing it. The tears came and I succumbed to my fate. I turned around to face her as I could feel she had followed me. "What do you want from me?" I screamed at her. She looked at me with that deep sadness in her eyes and came closer. "I want you to hear me out, child. I want to protect you. I'm running out of time, and you have to help me." I was lost for words, but somehow mastered the courage to reply. "Me? Help you? Aren't you supposed to be all-powerful and, evil? Aren't you the devil?" She came next to me and this time smiled. "My lovely child, yes, I was powerful once, but evil never. As for the name, I kind of hate it. You can call me Lilith." Somewhere in the distance, whistling was heard. I tried to speak, but she cut me off. "Child, you have to understand that what you know is all wrong. The world is in danger. You have been taught so many lies. You have been deceived. I'm not the one you should be afraid of. I'm not the one that is going to hurt you. I was God once." Hearing that, I started laughing. I laughed and laughed because I was sure I was crazy. This could not be happening. This thing in front of me, Lilith, was claiming to be God. She grabbed my hand and my laugh was cut short. "Child, you have to understand," she said. "I don't have much time. Can't you see I'm different? I'm getting older. Dying even. He found a way to make it happen. And if I'm gone, there's no one to save you. See through the lies. Believe me." The whistling was heard again. Closer. She squeezed my hand with profound urgency and pleading eyes. Whatever made me say the next words changed my life forever. "Okay, let's say I start to believe you. How can I help? What is happening?" The wind picked up suddenly, and I saw her shivering. "Not here," she said. "I will explain tonight. In the chapel. Tell no one where you are going. Don't even think about it in your mind. He's everywhere." And with that, she disappeared. I was left alone once again, thinking that I was insane, imagining things. The red mark on my hand from where she held me, though, was there to prove me wrong. I suddenly remembered about my mom and checked this time. I was surprised to see that no time had passed and somehow I was standing right next to my car. I decided to do what I was told and not to dwell on it in my head. I don't know who he was, but I was suddenly afraid. The rest of the drive was uneventful, and I have to admit that seeing my mom made me feel better. Upon returning home, we sat down and had dinner together, happily chatting away and reminiscing about the last time she came to visit. Suddenly, she stood up and proceeded to say she had a gift for me. She ran out to the car and brought in this little packet and gave it to me. "I hope you like it, my dear. It's a new perfume. Try it," she said. I thanked her and proceeded to open it. I took the cap off to smell it and froze. It was lavender. I tried my best to hide my horror from my mother and casually asked her why she chose to buy me this specific one. In retrospective, I wish I never asked because her answer chilled me to the core. She explained that she was in the shop struggling to buy me a present when a girl approached her. A girl roughly my age, with a lovely red dress. Her hair was the darkest black, and so were her eyes. My mom said she was instantly drawn to the girl, and they started chatting. The girl was really interested to hear that my mother had a daughter, and asked all sorts of questions about me. She said the girl suggested the perfume because it was her favorite. My mother said the girl seemed sure that I would love it, as lavender has such a soothing and familiar scent. I wish I could tell her how wrong she was. With this discovery in my mind, I decided I couldn't hear anymore. So I found an excuse to cut the conversation short and put a film on. A couple hours later, I said goodnight to my mom and headed up to my room. The time was almost midnight. I made sure my mom went to bed, waited a bit until she fell asleep, and got ready to make my way to the chapel. I was terrified, but determined to find out what was going on. "Okay, Lilith," I whispered as I got in my car. "You have my attention." As I left my house to drive to the chapel for my meeting with Lilith, I was sure someone was following me. I choked it up to my nerves and drove on. I barely realized how I got there since my mind was preoccupied with wondering what she was gonna tell me. I parked the car down a small alley so it wouldn't be visible, took a deep breath, and went in. Upon entering, all my nerves and agitation disappeared. The lavender scent was there, and all the candles were lit, giving the inside of the chapel a soft, warm glow that made me smile. I scanned the room with my eyes until I found her, and that's when my smile disappeared. She was hiding in the corner, visibly shaken, and I could see a slash on her right cheek. What made more impression on me, though, was that once again, she looked older and a lot more tired. I approached her with caution and whispered her name. She suddenly looked up and noticed her eyes light up when seeing me. "Oh, I'm so glad it's you. I was scared he found me again. Eve, come closer. I need to tell you everything before it's too late." The way she said my name made me shiver. Familiarity struck me and I was left numb. I felt I had seen this before. For the first time since first seeing her, I felt I really knew her. She caught up with my change of demeanor and she came closer. "So, you start to remember? I was hoping we would never have this conversation again. I was hoping that I had managed to keep you safe." I held her hand and tried to concentrate, but couldn't. "Please tell me what is happening, Lilith. Yes, this all seems familiar, but I can't piece anything together." She smiled softly, that warm, knowing smile, and she started her story. "Eve, first of all, you have to understand why it is vital you stay safe. It all started thousands of years ago. My father created me and my brothers, his angels. We were powerful beings and gladly helped Father to create the rest of the world. After we had finished, Father was content, but I felt empty. I felt that this beauty, this creation went underestimated. I felt we needed to create more, and so I did. I created you, Eve, and alongside you, Adam. I knew Father would never approve as he wanted to be the sole creator of everything in the universe. You see, Father was loving, but within limits. You could never defy him. You had to obey his rules. I kept you and Adam safe in the Garden of Eden, and you were so happy. Believe me, Eve, you were truly happy. But one day, the inevitable happened. You called me your God. A word so powerful on its own that stirred things, changed the balance, and he knew. I begged him to spare you. I begged him to take it out on me, to leave you, my children, alone. And he promised he would, Eve. If I gave up my heavenly rights and walk out of heaven once and for all, he promised he would allow you to keep living. I had no choice and left. But Father was cruel. Yes, he kept you alive, but tainted your existence. He made you miserable. He made you believe he created you and that he owns you. He made you hate me and praise him. Eve, you have to understand you never deserved this. Humanity never did. You did nothing wrong. The books and the teachings, everything is a lie. You are innocent, Eve. At this point, I was crying my eyes out. My memory was still hazy, but I knew this was true. But how did I get here? I managed to ask. How can I be alive? Ah, yes. You always ask me this. You have to understand that Father didn't count on one of his favorites loving me more than him. Michael let me know of Father's plan to deceive you with the apple, so I managed to put some of my grace in it. Once you took a bite, you became immortal, Eve. When your body dies, you simply move on to a new one. And it is the same for Adam. I have managed to keep you safe by erasing your memory from time to time. But now, he knows. Michael is long gone, and this is my last chance. You have to find Adam. You have to find and help him remember. And then you have to save the world. I was lost for words. I looked at her and tried to understand what was happening, when suddenly, the all-too-known whistling came. Lilith screamed in agony, and the candles went out. An icing feeling came over me, and I saw a shadow move closer. This was surreal. It was pitch black in the chapel, but still the shadow was clearly visible. It was like it was sucking all the air out of the room. I almost fainted when I heard his voice. "Finally, I found you, child." I screamed in terror. The candles came back on and I saw him. He was standing behind Lilith, and he looked nothing like I imagined. He was holding her close, hugging her, but you could see she was hurting. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" I asked. He laughed this roaring laugh that reached the bottom of my soul. "I wasn't talking to you," he said. "I was talking to my child, the one that betrayed me. Lilith, why would you do this to your own father? Haven't we been through enough? Don't you miss heaven?" Lilith looked at him with disgust. "You are not my father. You kill or cast away anything that doesn't fit your rules. What have you done to Michael?" "Ah, yes, Michael. The other disobedient child. Let's just say, Michael has been reprogrammed. He knows where he belongs now," he said while grabbing her tighter. I couldn't take anymore. I lunged at him. He stopped me with his eyes. The pain was excruciating and I howled. He laughed and I could hear his laugh in my head. "Please stop hurting her! Please, Father, stop!" Lilith screamed and managed to escape his grasp. She put her hand on my forehead, and immediately the pain went away. "Oh, Lilith, aren't you tired of wasting your grace? She's clearly not the savior you think she is. You will die in vain." And with the last comment, he pulled her close once again and flames engulfed her. She fell backwards with empty eyes looking at the ceiling. "What did you do to her, you monster?" I cried, but he was long gone. The lavender scent had disappeared, and all I was left with was darkness and this cold whisper. "Don't they say God works in mysterious ways?" You ever see an opportunity and think, that's too good to be true? Read through the fine print and find out more about it. Waiting with bated breath for when it turns out you're right? Here's a piece of advice I'll give you. I'm sure you've heard it before. I did it too, yet here, I'm now. When something seems too good to be true, it is. Here I am now, 9 more hours sitting at this desk watching security feeds. Then I get to go home and wonder why the fuck I believe that this overpaid and seemingly easy security position didn't come with a catch. Why I didn't notice all the red flags in between seeing the offer online and getting here. Why I genuinely believe I'll be lucky to have the chance to regret my decision after my shift. Let's go back to earlier today. There I was, switching between browsing Reddit and flipping through local job offers, when a refresh of a local job listing site revealed something new that caught my eye. A basic security position. Job description basically amounted to locking the doors at night, watching cameras and calling the company if anything bad happened. And in the description, they said they would pay $37 an hour. I was immediately skeptical of the high wage for a basic security job, especially considering the company had next to do no info on it on the web. Their small website had pictures of the founders and outside of their buildings, but didn't even say what they did. However, I had the qualifications from a class I'd taken a year ago, and the possibility of walking away with $300 for a night's work seemed enticing, even if it might have been a scam. I figured it couldn't hurt to send in a resume and see what happened. I got a call from a private number, not an hour after submitting my application. The conversation was odd. The person on the other end of the line seemed like they had no experience hiring people before, and their voice seemed somewhat stressed and worried. A couple more red flags. But I was still in the "it could be legit, and if it's not, I haven't lost anything" mindset. I'll try to recreate the phone conversation here. "Hello, is this Christopher?" said the voice on the other end. I replied, "Yes, speaking." "Who is this?"
This is, I work for
Company.
Incorporation. I'm, Daniel Edwards, head of HR. Former head of security. I'm calling because you submitted an application to us."
Daniel paused. I waited expectantly for him to continue, but when the silence dragged on a moment too long, I realized he was done speaking. "What about my application?"
"Oh, we'd like you to come for an interview. Your credentials looked good. Yeah. Can you come to
Address.
in 2 hours?"
I was surprised. It seemed to me like either A, it was a scam, or B, they needed the position filled fast, maybe even by tonight. If it was the latter, I was pretty sure I could talk them up to an even higher wage, so I made my decision there. I'd check out the address on Google Street View and see if there was any other info on it before I went there. And if it seemed off, I just wouldn't show up for the interview. "Sure thing. Thank you." Daniel hung up the phone before I even finished speaking. Fast forward to 2 hours later. I was arriving at a fenced-off property in my city's industrial district, occupied by 2 buildings. They bore minimal markings and logos but appeared to be in fair condition, and supposedly still belonged to the company I was going there to see. I pulled my 2001 Honda Civic through the gate and into the parking lot. Something felt slightly off right away, though I didn't pick up on what it was until later. The parking lot was empty except for one other car. I stepped out and walked into the larger one-story building facing directly onto the parking lot. The door was unlocked. The receptionist's desk sat empty, and I recall noticing that there was dust on the blades of the fan that sat there. There was no email address in the post on the job site, and Daniel had called me from a private number. Unsure what to do, I waited in the small lobby for a few minutes and looked around at my surroundings. The entrance was a single glass door, and the front wall was made up of floor-to-ceiling windows. A metal shutter system rested on the outer wall above the glass, and a control panel on the wall inside. The receptionist's desk sat against the wall opposite the door. On either side of the room were 8 chairs and 2 small coffee tables, complete with old magazines. To the left, a short hallway led past a single door on either side, terminating at a heavy unpainted metal exterior door bearing dents of various sizes and shapes. For some odd reason, the exterior door made me feel uneasy. All 3 doors contained a single small window, the kind with wire mesh inside it, obscured by black paint or cloth on the inside. To the right led another hall. Oddly enough, I can't recall the length, and I usually have good attention to detail. Was it 4 doors on either side? No. 2? 16 maybe? I'm not even sure it had a length. I didn't look at the end of the right hallway. Behind the receptionist's desk was another longer hallway terminating in a T intersection. The first door on the left was made of brown painted metal and bore a small placard of Security Office. After waiting for a minute, a man rushed in through the front door. "Sorry to have kept you waiting. I'm Joshua Collins, head of HR." He spoke quickly and seemed frantic and skittish. He didn't hold eye contact for more than a second at a time. As he shook my hand, I could feel that his palms were sweaty and cold. "Christopher Newman." I paused for a second, suddenly hit by a wave of skepticism, and decided to test if he could keep his story straight. "I spoke to a man named Daniel Edwards on the phone. I thought he said he was the head of HR." Joshua ignored me and continued. "Mr. Newman, my company needs a new security guard fast. The last 2 quit this morning, and we can't afford to go a night without someone watching the property. We've tried to get you here as fast as possible because you'll need to be ready to work by sunset. We're in a rush, so we'll skip the usual process. If you're able to start right now, then you can consider yourself hired. Your salary is $37 an hour, non-negotiable. Sign this NDA and you can start right now." I didn't like how aggressive he was being, but it had showed that I was right. They were looking for a fast, probably temporary hire, and I wasn't about to turn down that kind of money. I flipped through the NDA. It was a long one, so I skipped most of it, but I know how these contracts are. Don't disclose company secrets, yada yada. I signed it and followed Joshua to the security office. The orientation was short and simple. "Here's your keychain. This one opens the door to the security office. This one opens most of the other offices. This one controls the shutter on the front windows. Here's your mag light. You can use it as a baton in a pinch, but you're better to lock yourself in the office and call us if you see anything suspicious. All you have to do is sit in that office and watch the camera feeds. You don't need to patrol since you don't have a partner to watch the feeds when you're gone. We don't provide a uniform. Just put your badge on your shirt. Front door is the only one that's unlocked right now. Ignore the other exterior doors and the offices in the long hallway. Lock the front gate. That's it." "What's this binder for?" I asked, pointing at a white binder on the desk, bearing the company logo. Read that during your shift." Joshua looked uncomfortable at the mention of the binder, and avoided my gaze as he stammered out his reply. He didn't wait to see if I had further questions before he hurriedly left, getting into the only car in the parking lot, apart from mine, and speeding off. I assumed my security guard role right away. I went outside and locked the gate, closed the metal shutter over the front glass, and locked the front door. Then I sealed myself in the security office and opened the binder up. That binder is what prompted me to write this down. When I opened it, I expected a long, boring write-up of company policy involving various situations that may happen after hours. Specific rules for dealing with burglars and vandals, that sort of thing. Instead, there was only one page. What was on that page made me realize that this job was, in fact, too good to be true, and is why I'm genuinely terrified right now. Welcome to, redacted, incorporation. There are 10 company rules security personnel must follow in order to ensure their safety and well-being. The long hallway is off limits. If you cross the threshold from the lobby, turn around immediately and walk back. Do not run. Do not look at the long hallway for prolonged periods. If any security camera shows it, shut it down immediately. Do not open the door at the end of the short hallway. Building 2 is off limits and is to be observed only via camera feeds. If you must go outside, use only the front door. The coffee machine will turn on automatically at 2:17 a.m. Ensure a cup is placed beneath it prior to this time. When the liquid is dispensed into the cup, place it outside the door of the security office. Lock the door and do not open it again until 2:37 a.m. Do not leave the security office between 4:01 and 4:02 a.m. If you hear a female voice coming from an indeterminate point within the building, unlock the door on the left of the short hallway. Do not enter the room unless the voice invites you to do so. Do not look at her face. If you hear a male voice upon unlocking the door, return to the security office immediately. If you feel you're in immediate danger, call this number using the phone in the security office. Redacted. Do not contact emergency services before sunrise. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to leave. Redacted. Incorporation before sunrise. I have 9 hours left in this shift. I'd rather walk out of here broke than stick around for the rest of the night, but the instructions made it clear that I'll have to stick it out till morning. Wish me luck. Update. It's 2:15 a.m. It's been fairly uneventful so far, and I hope I don't jinx it by saying that. I've just stayed in the office and split my time between watching security camera feeds and browsing Reddit to calm my nerves. It's demon coffee time in 2 minutes. The cup is already in place and I'm hoping everything goes well. Update 2. 3:30 a.m. Demon coffee disappeared after being left outside the door. I heard something knocking and scratching at the door during the time I was told to keep it closed, though I wasn't able to see it on the cameras. The only one watching the office door started showing the long hallway and I had to turn it off. There is a persistent shadow in the corner of the room that seems darker than a normal shadow. It doesn't go away even when I shine my flashlight right at it. The instructions didn't say anything about a shadow, so I'm just gonna not touch it and occasionally check to see if it changes size or moves or anything. Still haven't heard the woman's voice. I could have sworn I glimpsed a humanoid figure on the Building 2 cameras a few times, though I can't find it when I inspect the feeds more closely. I no longer have even the slightest doubt that this place is haunted as shit. Update 3. 4:29 a.m. I was feeling pretty shaken, so I didn't write this up immediately, but here's basically what happened. I'll put it in more detail in my next post. At 3:45, I heard the woman's voice. I was going to ignore it until 4:02, but it got louder and louder until it hurt, and I gave in. She invited me in, but I heard the male voice as soon as I sat down, and I ran back to the office. As for what happened at 4:01, I'll write that up later. I'm still really shaken by it. I'll just say I was glad for the reinforced metal door on the office, and that I really, really regret taking this job. If you ask most people of a certain age, who was the first British person to go into space, they'll tell you it was Helen Sharman in 1991. If you ask them, who was the first British person to land on the moon, they'll always give the wrong answer, unless they say that no British person has ever walked on the moon. Well, that's the official truth. What they won't tell you is that just before the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, there was a top-secret moon mission. While the majority of the world's population believed that the Soviets had no connection with Western Europe, it was a lot more civilized than all of that. Yes, the Cold War has made enemies on an official level, but we were hardly enemies on a personal level. After all, the Russians and us Brits both came under attack from Hitler just 50 years previously, so the flame of friendship was still there to be kindled. I can't disclose to you everything I know about this. After all, most of it is still bound under the Official Secrets Act until 2040, after which they'll most likely extend it by another 50 years. Nor do I have any proof. The few documents which were assigned to me were confiscated, and I witnessed them destroyed in the furnace beneath Whitehall. I can tell you when it was and where it was launched from, though. It was in the middle of June 1989 when I was first chosen, if you can call it that. I can't recall the exact date, but I do remember that at the time, I just went along with it. The two men who came into my study unannounced told me that I was required in the most verbally forceful way you can imagine. I didn't believe them at first. I thought it was just another university joke, but I thought I'd see how far it would go. They walked me to their car, which they had parked directly outside the entrance to the main building. I didn't take notice of what it was at the time, but it was probably a Jaguar XJ12 judging by the shape and jet black color. The entire journey as I sat on the back seat was in silence, other than a couple of times when the man in the passenger seat answered a call on the CB radio which was fitted into the dashboard. My thoughts changed when only an hour later, I found myself sitting at a table in a small windowless room all on my own, somewhere in Westminster. The lack of windows was certainly compensated for with the quality of the carpet. I remember that much. Without warning, the door opened and about a dozen people walked in. They were all middle-aged or older. Some were Russian, judging by their accents, and all clutching folders overflowing with documents, while talking very aggressively amongst themselves. They didn't acknowledge me, at least not immediately. A lot of what was said went over my head. It was all political babble to me. They used terms which I wasn't familiar with, at least not in the context they referred to them in. I remember one specific phrase one of the older men said, in a strong Russian accent. "The last time a human being set foot on the moon was on the 14th December 1972. That was almost 20 years ago. We must know if they're still up there." I was confused. Everyone knows that all 3 crew members from Apollo 17 returned home safely. There was no doubt over that. There was a brief silence as the others looked at each other, hoping for somebody to say something to break the silence. I don't know why I did it, but my naivete got the better of me. "Sorry, I thought all 3 of the Apollo 17 crew came back to Earth?" Everybody stared towards me as if I'd just said something disgusting. The older man stared at me before answering my question. "Do you think we are fearful of mere humans being on the moon?" I felt silly. My mind darted between many different ideas, but he was right. It was over 20 years ago. If they had been any left behind, they'd have run out of oxygen and supplies within days, and would have perished soon after. This wasn't a good start for me. He leaned forward and addressed me directly in a lowered tone of voice. "You have, nor ever will have, any idea of what we know is up there." I said nothing, partly to avoid making myself look foolish, but also because the atmosphere in the room was so tense. He handed me some stapled pages from his folder. "I assume you were not briefed about this meeting, comrade?" I wanted to correct him on his use of the term comrade, but I decided to just read the document instead. But I don't remember word for word what it said, but the front was emblazoned with "Classified, Level 7, nothing else." I turned the page and there were a series of black and white photographs. The images were not only disturbing, but horrifying. The first one was a landscape image, taken on the lunar surface, but with some sort of structure visible in the distance. The second image was of a lunar lander, but it looked like it'd been sliced open from top to bottom. No jagged edges or debris laying about, just cut in half. All I remember was some Cyrillic characters on the side which remained. The third image was the most disturbing. It was a very basic spacesuit laying on the lunar surface with the mangled, icy remains of its occupants scattered around the broken visor. It almost looked as if he'd been ripped out of his suit through his visor at very high speed. The fourth image showed several other spacesuits laying on the surface, maybe 75 yards away from the camera. I certainly wasn't expecting to see this. I wanted to go outside and throw up, but I held it back, at least until the meeting was over. "Russian lunar landing, October 1968, he said, as I gazed at the horrific images. "Those Americans thought they would get to the moon first. They thought Russian technology was inferior. They were wrong." One of the British men sitting across the table stubbed out a cigarette on the table. "For Christ's sake, Krostov, stop with all the commie propaganda and get to the point." The older man, who I know now as Krostov, didn't hesitate to slim down his story. "Okay, so we landed on the moon in 1968, only about 6 kilometers from where Apollo 17 landed in 1972, but nowhere near any of the other American moon landings. We know they landed safely, but radio contact was lost about 5 hours after they landed. We assumed it was mechanical failure of the plutonium fuel cell. They couldn't take off or communicate. It was both a victory and a loss for Russia. This was a secret mission, so everybody involved just carried on as normal after. Death was nothing new to them, no matter how many times they saw it. I started to join the dots in my head, but I remained fixated on what Krostov is saying. The Americans landed their manned lunar module in 1969. and then 4 more, and then the last one in December 1972. And it was on the 22nd December 1972 that we were told. Kravstov looked over to one of the other men who had all remained silent. He spoke with a Texan accent, but with a very deep and authoritative voice. Yes, as soon as we were sure, we notified the Kremlin immediately. He paused as he rifled through some of his notes. There had been a discovery by the crew on board Apollo 17 of an unknown lunar module. We assumed it was Russian, and a few minutes after receiving the images, they confirmed that the craft we had discovered was Russian. Tell him what your crew found, comrade, Kravstov said to the American. Well, we weren't exactly sure at the time, but the debris laying around the module was in fact human remains. Not only that, but they were decapitated beyond all recognition. Well, soon after their gruesome discovery, the 3 crew members of Apollo 17 unanimously announced that they wanted to return to Earth immediately. We told them that was impossible. The service module, which was orbiting the moon, was in the wrong trajectory at the time, and so they had no choice but to stay inside their module until it was time to return. They told us that from inside the module, they could see figures outside, picking over the equipment they had left outside. I mean, these guys were 20 feet away from whatever these things were, with only the lunar module to protect them. Those modules are designed to withstand the vacuum of space and the forces of the launch. They simply aren't designed to withstand physical attack. I was so shocked. I just asked him without thinking what I was about to say. So, if all this happened, why did the Apollo 17 crew look so normal when they were welcomed back in front of everyone? He almost smiled as he said it. Of course they looked happy, smiling and waving to everyone. The men that everybody saw that day had been nowhere near a spacecraft, let alone the moon. I was confused, but he continued before I had a chance to say anything. Those men were in no fit state to be in the public eye when they came back, so we thought we'd get some actors to take over all their PR and celebrity status until they got better. Unfortunately for them, they never did get better. I mean, physically they were fine, but mentally, forget it. Their minds were gone. Half of the time they had to be sedated just to get them to sit down and eat. Wouldn't stop talking about seeing these figures everywhere. And when one of them finally told us about them, well, it wasn't pretty. He said they were like an opaque shadow, but with such a menacing stare. He said one of them looked right at him as he peered out of the lunar module. I think he meant he stared at it, because from what he said, they didn't have eyes. He said they just stared straight into your soul, plundering all of your thoughts and projecting fear and terror into your mind. We still don't know a lot of what happened up there. All we have to go on are the pictures, and not much else. I turned the page of the document I held in my hand. The edges were now damp with sweat from my hands. The next image showed a glimpse of one of these figures. It was hideous. It was nothing more than a very dark shadow, but with a very distinctive outline and limbs, if you can call them that. It's hard to tell from the angle from which the photograph was taken, but I guess these figures were about 9 or 10 feet high. So, what do I have to do with any of this? I asked him. One of the other men quickly replied, As a professor of psychology, we need to be certain that if the crew of this next mission are affected in any way, that you'll be able to cure them. I was shocked. I still don't know what this had to do with me. I still fail to understand why you feel the need to involve me with this. A few of the men started looking at each other before Kravstov just came out and said it. We have our reasons for selecting you. We have studied your case file extensively, and we are satisfied that you meet all of the necessary criteria for this task. I stood up in anger. That's ridiculous. You mean to say that just because I spent 18 months working in a mental asylum, Suddenly I'm qualified to cure your crew after they see things that go beyond the human imagination 20 feet away from them while they're 250,000 miles from another living soul? You obviously have no idea how psychology works, do you? Why on earth would you want to send anyone back there? The last crew in 72 barely made it back alive, if you can call being spoon-fed your dinner at the age of 39 a life. Kravstov wasn't entirely pleased, but I refused to go ahead with this. Okay, tell you what. Take these documents, read through them carefully, and if you change your mind, let us know. My mind was already made up. I wasn't going to take on this assignment, but I took the documents away to avoid further confrontation with Kravstov or the others. I was then driven back to my university by the two student goons who had brought me all the way to London. I'll admit, I did consider it once it had time to sink in, but I decided that hearing first-hand accounts of evil, ungodly figures from intelligent men who'd had their minds pulled apart by some otherworldly force just wasn't for me. I still remember the launch details and the number of crew members, though. It was launched from the Okhotsk launch site in Russia on the 22nd December 1990. There were 3 crew members, 1 British and 2 Russians. I can't recall their names, though. I thought no more about it, and filed the documents away in a box folder in my study. In January of 1991, a day or two after we'd returned from the Christmas break, I received a phone call. I was to be picked up the next day, and I was to bring with me the documents I had been given about 7 months earlier. I reminded them that I wanted nothing to do with this. They understood and respected my wishes. They agreed I would not have to conduct any psychological experiment, but I was still to attend tomorrow. As planned, I was picked up by the 2 same goons who dropped me off the last time, both still as talkative as they were last time. I brought my briefcase with me containing the documents as requested. On arrival to Whitehall, I wasn't taken to the small room with no windows. I was instead taken downstairs into the cellar. Kravstov and a few of the others were there.
It's good to see you again, comrade. In a way.
I was confused by his ambiguity. What did he mean by, in a way? Yes, well, I was told I won't need to conduct any psychological treatments, so why am I back here? He paused before looking up from the ground.
The mission was a failure.
I thought about something to say. Power or communications problems? I replied gingerly. Kravstov sighed.
Neither, unfortunately. The equipment was fine, until after we saw what happened to them on the video link monitor.
I felt ice cold with fear over what he was about to tell me.
The figures, they were not only still there, they were waiting for them. As soon as they landed, they'd hardly had time to turn off the navigation computer before the whole thing was ripped apart.
I tried to think logically for a moment. These were figures we were talking about. What if there was a mechanical failure? What if... Kravstov interrupted me.
There was no failure. I'll tell you how I know. Those figures are just the foot soldiers. We have been warned off of the moon twice. There are no more warnings. If we do return, they will class it as an act of war, and I don't mean one with guns and bombs. This'll be a war on the psyche of the human mind. Nobody can imagine what that is like.
I couldn't think of anything to say.
The module landed on the lunar surface at 3:45 a.m. GMT on Christmas Day 1990. At 3:47 a.m., the crew were seen on video link as they were decapitated in their lunar module. At 3:48 a.m., all of the high-speed line printers at the mission control in Okhotsk just printed the same text again and again, warning us to stay away from the moon, with great details of the consequences if we do not heed their warning.
I was both angry and fearful. I was angry as to why they would send 3 innocent men to their inevitable deaths to 250,000 miles away to be torn apart by these figures, but I was fearful for what we would all suffer if another moon landing took place in the future. So, what do we do now? I asked Kravstov.
You have the documents?
Kravstov stood there with his hand out. I took them from my briefcase and handed them to him.
No copies? You have not duplicated these?
I shook my head as I regretted not doing so earlier. He walked down the corridor to a small room which contained a metal chute. He lifted the metal lid and an orange glow filled the room, along with a wave of hot air. He loosely rolled up the documents and threw them into the chute leading to the furnace before the lid slammed back over it.
That was the last trace. As long as you have made no duplications officially, that mission never took place.
He immediately went back into the corridor. I followed him, closing the door to the furnace room behind us.
You can find your own way home, comrade.
He reached out to shake my hand. After what I just heard and done, I shook his hand instinctively without thinking.
Please don't imagine our paths won't ever cross again, comrade. We may need you again one day, but next time, your assistance would be mandatory,
he said as he turned and walked away. Intro. Well, the title says it all. I'm a member of the Green Berets, the US most prestigious warriors they have ever bred. This journey I'm about to tell you all started during the coronavirus outbreak. Now, if you've ever heard of David Paulides and Missing 411, then you get an idea of what I'll be discussing shortly. It began with a briefing from our superiors on our mission. There had been a surge of missing person cases in this particular national park before COVID hit. I won't say what park, but just know it was somewhere with much mountain terrain. This story will be told from my viewpoint and my partner, Nikolai. Briefing. SSG. Alright everyone, sit down and listen up. We've been asked for our assistance in surveying this park by the National Park and the White House. To keep it simple, we're tasked with discovering and eliminating whatever it is that is taking people from this park. The base has been set up, and we've been asked to back up the FBI and their squads. We were told 2 of their squads were killed overnight, and military involvement has been requested by the president. This mission is top secret, and as you know, nobody is to know of this. We've been so generously given everything we need to complete this mission. The national park and the surrounding area has been closed off to the public, but this shouldn't be an issue due to the stay-at-home order set in place. This goes for all national parks. You are but one of many special forces tasked to eliminate this threat that has been deemed a national security concern by the White House. We've been given radar, and will have air support on standby, as well as a blackbird in the air to keep eye on your mission. You'll be given 50 cals, armored 4x4 Humvees, maps, live communication, thermal and night vision, and the best weaponry the United States military has to offer. Luckily, we were given intel from the indigenous tribe that borders the park. Your bullets have been dipped in ash, and whatever poor beings that may encounter will experience the full force that the United States military has to offer. That being said, you have 24 hours to get ready for your mission. Any questions? No response. Good. Day 1. As morning dawned, I made a cup of coffee, got my gear on, and proceeded to the meeting point on the base. We began our trip in our armored 4x4 Humvees, and proceeded to the HQ base deep in the woods, which took the whole day. We took the forest road as dusk was approaching night. Radio. Alright men, keep a lookout, primarily the tree line. As we drove, all was normal when suddenly, we saw a pair of yellow eyes beginning to follow along with our platoon. Radio. Don't worry, it's only a scout, but stay frosty. After a mile or so, we were in the clear. Nikolai. Don't worry, they won't attack us unless the eyes are red. That was nice, I guess. We then approached the gates to HQ as we entered the range of light that the fog lights emitted. Once inside the base, we got out and proceeded inside. Now, I have been on military bases before, but this was pretty new. The base was filled with these fog lights and barbed wire fencing to keep anything outside the base out, not to mention the towers with thermal heat sensing 50 cals, as well as multiple MPs guarding the inside. The security for this base was something I would expect in the Middle East, not in the middle of the woods in the United States. Once inside the building, we were ordered to get our gear ready for an escorted patrol in the woods to investigate a cabin that a squad of FBI agents searched. We were called in for backup. Once we approached the cabin, we pulled security outside the cabin. Nikolai and I drew our rifles and our squad mate Roger broke down the door. We swept the cabin and saw one FBI agent cowering in the corner, while this long, tall, skinny creature was feasting on the other now deceased FBI agent. Next thing I know, Nikolai blew that thing's head off with his shotgun. After we swept each room and deemed the cabin clear, we brought the surviving agent back to base. When questioned, the agent said, "We proceeded to enter the cabin, and we heard some movement in one of the rooms, and as we approached it, the door swung open and the creature killed my whole squad. I thought I was a goner when it approached me, and it spoke, 'I'll let you watch as I feast until you're the last son of a Yahweh. Your fear will make you a delicious meal.' It kept smiling as it spoke and I just broke down. That's when you guys came in." My SSG asked him, "And the missing boy?" "I'm afraid we were too late. He was already dead when we arrived." Day 2. Another mission we were sent on was to investigate a summit, where a ranger reported that on an overnight hike, his tent was approached by multiple faceless men, and they screamed such horrid noises he was paralyzed with fear and had to be airlifted the following morning. Apparently, the rangers had a rise of missing person cases around this summit. So we set up a fake camp and used the same ranger as bait. He was scared, but felt better with the fact that he had backup for us. We set up snipers, and the rest of my squad surrounded the tent from a good distance. Activating night vision. Around 1 a.m., we saw movement. About 5 of those faceless men approached the tent and began to yell those noises. Then we fired. Snipers first, then the rest of the squad moved in. Those things tried to run off, but were met with the full force of my platoon. Safe to say none of them got out of there alive. Our radio went off. "Stay put, outside the agency approaching to recover bodies." Now my platoon was basically there to eliminate the threat. But as far as this outside agency, we had no clue who they were, nor what branch of government they belonged to. All I know is they picked up the bodies, and Men in Black spoke with my SSG, as well as the commander back at HQ. Then they left. Me to Nikolai. "Who the hell are those guys?" Nikolai. "No idea, but it's best we don't ask questions. I'll say this, as our missions became more disturbing, I found it very hard to just do my job without knowing the full details. But nonetheless, I'm a soldier, and I have a job to do, which I intend to do. Our next mission. Now, this was one of the worst missions I was a part of. We drove our Humvees to investigate reports of mutilated deer surrounding a lake that was popular during the park's normal hours when the park was open to the public. Once we arrived, the weather began to get worse, and then we noticed the red color the lake began to give off. Then the strange cloud arrived, a crimson red just hovering over the lake. For some reason, Roger began to become hysterical and losing his damn mind, and then shot his 50 cal at the cloud screaming, "No! You won't take me!" And then right after he shot, he was just pulled into the cloud and the weather got so bad we couldn't even see. As soon as it started, it stopped, with Roger simply gone. We did not know what to do, so we reported what happened and HQ reported back, "Leave the area now!" SSG, "Understood." We then returned with a full force with air support. We found Roger's body dismembered and decapitated just floating in the lake. Also, those same unnamed agents came to pick up his body parts from the lake and again was speaking to my chain of command. After this loss of my close brother in arms, I couldn't take it anymore. When the agent was speaking to my commander, I walked in to demand answers. I knew I would be in trouble, but I interrupted the meeting, and after arguing with my commander to know what was going on, the leader of said agency broke the arguing. "It's fine, Commander. This one here is one of your top soldiers, so we can let him know." "Well, son, I can only say so much, but what I can tell you is this. You're basically the first wave of forces to investigate these strange occurrences in the park. Then when the situation is deemed too great, that's where we come in." Me. "Okay, so if we can't fight off some evil weather entity, how the hell can you guys stop it?" Agent. "Oh,
We are aware of this. Normally your weapons are perfect to deal with cryptids, but this is beyond those insignificant creatures. We have weapons to not exactly destroy, but halt those sentient weather beings, who are controlled by and what we believe are extraterrestrials. The natives speak of these events as gods who control the weather, and their way of halting it was blood sacrifices. But when I say extraterrestrials, I'm not talking about little green men. No, these are extra-dimensional beings. They can come into this reality in and out as they please. Our mission is to stop this with the military's help, of course. Together, we hope to curb this. So, what do these ETs want? We don't exactly know. We have captured some, and at first, they couldn't be contained until we had a group of physicists create a room that does not allow these beings to escape. These ETs tell us one thing, but we believe they're not 100% honest. They see us in the same way we see animals in a zoo. One way we reduce these instances is to allow them to abduct people. Me. Wait, so you're fine with innocent people being abducted? Why on earth would you be okay with this? My commander interrupted. That's enough, soldier. The agent put up his hand in a stop motion. It's fine, Commander. Look here. As far as we know, this is the best outcome until we can figure out a way to stop them. As of now, they are uncontrollable. We'll close the parks until it is deemed somewhat safe for the public, but don't be surprised if you hear of missing person cases. Now, I assume I don't have to worry about you speaking of this, right? Me. Not like anyone would believe me. Don't worry about me. I simply wanted to know the entirety of my mission. Agent. That's something I expected from a decorated soldier such as yourself. Now, Commander, please escort your soldier out. I believe he deserves some relaxation after the hell he has experienced. Before leaving, I managed to find a folder in the safe that contained more information than what was given to me. Apparently, we found something in the cave from a mission Nikolai was on, before this recent one. That mission was in Yosemite National Park. After confronting Nikolai about this, he told me we should talk in a more private setting, and told me to leave my phone and anything trackable. We drove to a parking lot by a local bar a few miles from base. This base was the one we arrived in, not the one in the forest for clarity's sake. Nikolai. So, this is what happened. I and my fellow squad were sent to investigate a cave. We got into a huge firefight, and 3/4 of my squad was killed trying to capture one of these interdimensional beings. Apparently, when they are in the physical form, there is a slight window of opportunity where you can damage them. We managed to knock it out and locked it in a room that apparently the ET could not escape. Don't ask me how it works, I'm not a physicist. Though, it was thanks to a Russian physicist that designed the room. It basically said that the cave was one of many that connect together to the mother cave. It refers to itself as a fallen angel, and that the rest of its kind along with its king will escape when the earth cracks releasing them. I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like the Book of Revelations to me. It even said that the time will come in the same year that a great plague would cripple the world, which would start in China. Then, just as this ET predicted our military confirmed large heat signatures underground, the plan was to detonate a nuke. However, the problem was it was directly under Yellowstone National Park. Now these beings apparently lie, and this was indeed a lie because we mistook the heat signatures. They were indeed indicating magma activity. Individual heat signatures were found in Alaska. One of our scouting squads confirmed this when they found the mother cave and sent out an RC out with a camera. And to our horror, we saw more of these creatures that would make a Wendigo look like a puppy. The military plans on sending a large force to make some noise, but even then, I don't know how the US alone will fare up against these things. So now, here I am writing this out. People need to realize what is going on in these parks. The government and military have no control over these events. It's best you stay away from the forest. I was granted leave for a few weeks, and when I returned, I was tasked with leading a squad for our next mission. I'm currently waiting for a flight to Alaska, apparently. The Russians experienced the same phenomena in Siberia, and followed the cave system to Alaska.
The United States and Russia are teaming up after found something that will shake our beliefs even further. Until then, it's best you stay home, for the virus isn't the only thing to keep you out of the woods. It was August 9th, 2010. I was 38 years old. My oldest daughter, Avis, was 12, and the younger pair, Joanne and John, were 9-year-old twins. I had been married for 15 years. I worked at an insurance firm, and every Sunday, while my wife and Avis went to church and the twins went to my mother's house, I took a walk. It was a clockwork sort of arrangement. My wife knew never to push me into going with her. I was an atheist and set on staying that way. Of course, given what's happened, my views have changed. It was just a normal day. Avis gave me a kiss on the cheek and told me not to forget my coat, even if it was an abnormally warm day. I'd say it was maybe 65, maybe 68 degrees Fahrenheit. My mom picked up the twins, and I started down my walk. We lived off the beaten path, so to speak. Our road was never busy, and most of the area was taken up by farmland. A truck passed me on the road and I waved. I was pretty sure it was Art, although it could have been one of his sons on his way to church. Either way, he waved back. I took a turn to the right onto Hensel. Hensel was a dirt road, but it was never traveled except by farmers, and today it was quiet. Good time to collect my thoughts. Every other time before this, I turned back around once I reached Art's farmhouse, although occasionally his wife would pull me in for lemonade and gossip. But August 9th would be the day I took the longest walk of my life. I was passing by the cornfield when I heard laughter. To be more specific, it was a child's laughter. I paused and looked into the cornfield. A pair of forest green eyes looked back at me. The girl looked to be no older than 7, had red hair tied into twin braids, and I assumed she was one of Art's grandchildren. She smiled broadly. "Catch me!" She darted back into the corn, and I could hear her giggle slowly fade away. Normally, I would have scoffed at going into the field, as I'd have to cross the ditch and I didn't want to get dirt on my pants. But I felt a little bit of concern. A small child running around the field by herself. So with a jump that I knew my niece would feel in the morning, I jumped into the cornfield. Using the sound of her laughter, I started pushing through the corn. The dry leaves scratched at my face and hands, and dust kicked up into my face. I knew she couldn't outrun me for long. Even if she was a child with boundless energy, I had longer legs. However, I exited the cornfield in a place I didn't know. My house was nowhere to be seen, and there was a light layer of snow covering the ground. I spun around, but the corn was gone, replaced by frosted evergreen trees. The temperature had significantly dropped, and I was now thankful that my daughter insisted I bring a coat. I shivered and spun around a few more times, trying to make sense of this dream I'd apparently fallen into. And where was that little girl? "Hey, mister!" I finally spun around enough to see her, peering past a branch. She grinned. "You catch me, I'll show you the way out." That began the chase. Getting smacked with tree branches was far worse than the corn, the needles tearing at my skin like knives as I pushed past them to find the little girl. Whenever I got lost, I'd hear her laugh. She was having fun. I was not. The wet snow beneath my feet made it impossible to gain traction, and forced running. I'd slip if I so much as stepped wrong. With every minute I got colder and colder. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached. Then I broke from the tree line into a grassy meadow. I didn't expect a change, so I ended up toppling over. The grass smelled sweet as honey. A fat bumblebee trundled past my head and landed on a black-eyed Susan. It was heaven. But the peace of the meadow was broken by that girl laughing again. "Aw, are you already giving up?" The warm sunlight made her glow, like a tiny angel. But as I stumbled to my feet, I caught something behind those big eyes I hadn't before. Malevolence. She was toying with me, and she knew it. I can't tell you how many times the environment changed. One minute it'd be across a meadow, then a desert during a sandstorm. I'd have to rely solely on hearing her in places like that. Sometimes, we'd be back in the cornfield, and I'd shout for Art to get me out of here, but no help ever came. Sometimes, we'd be running across barren tundra, where she'd been just out of my grasp. She wasn't always a little girl either. Sometimes she was a young teen, with a gap between her teeth and who'd hum sweet tunes. Sometimes she was a ravishing model of her early 20s, with fiery hair and a flirtatious grin. And at times she wasn't any of those. She was an ancient crone, with a bent back and arthritic hands that clutched to her crane but still managed to hobble away from me. She called herself Clarice occasionally. Other times it was Lolita, Dixie, Isabella, Hope. I lost count of her names too. A straight answer was impossible. She'd never lie to me though, just avoid answering any of the questions I'd ask her. So I knew she was my key out of there. It was in the meadow where I finally got her. She was a little girl again, and her taunting was beyond cruel this time. She'd stop, pick flowers, and run on before I could grab her. She'd throw the flowers about and sing ridiculous nonsense songs, and I knew I couldn't ever win like this. So I dropped to the ground. The little girl stopped. "Oh, are you really giving up now? You're so close." Nothing. I remained still as I gasped for breath. I heard her get closer and closer. "Mister, are you okay? Do you need a break? You've been going on a really long time." Once I saw her shadow, I lunged. She almost got away, but my hand wrapped around her braid and I pulled her back so hard I could have snapped her neck. I embraced her in my arms and breathed out, "I got you!" I never felt so successful in my entire life. I'd finally gotten her. She turned around and smiled sadly. "Can we play again? We were having fun. You don't have to go back. We can stay here." No way. I was done with this. "Nope. You let me out of here right now or I'm strangling you with your own braids." A little dramatic perhaps, but I gripped tighter onto her hair to make clear my point. She sighed before she kissed my cheek, the same place Avis did before church. "Okay." When I woke up, I was in the middle of the plowed cornfield. It was a springtime. The ground was churned to mud and the water freezing cold. I peeled myself off the ground and began stumbling home. It was then I noticed how tired I truly was. My mouth was parched as the deserts I ran through. My body was stiff and ached like I'd run 1,000 miles. And there was a chance I had. I had one goal in mind though, and that was home. I could finally go home. Despite tripping through the mud a dozen times, I caught sight of my house and immediately began to cry. Barely able to move, I just pointed myself to the backyard. My wife should be home about now. She'd see me and come to my aid. 2 teenage boys were on the back porch. One was smoking while the other was playing on his phone. I couldn't recognize either of them. Had my family moved? I raised my hand and attempted to speak, but it came out as a raspy moan. Both boys jumped out of their skin. The one smoking dropped his cigarette and they backed off. The shorter one raised a hand. "Sir, you're gonna have to..." He trailed off and his eyes widened. The eyes that looked exactly like my wife's. "Dad!" I passed out on the ground, just a few steps from the back door. I woke up in the hospital. I had been cleaned up, had an IV running into my arm, and a woman was sitting next to my bed, fast asleep with a tattoo of a bird on her neck, a sparrow to be exact. Avis always loved her sparrows. I had been gone for a little over 7 years. When I didn't return from my walk, my wife reported me missing. At first, law enforcement assumed I just ran off with another woman, but when that line of investigation went dry, they realized I'd been the victim of foul play. Search parties were made, people were questioned, no one was imprisoned. They never found me, and life marched on. Art apparently died about a year after I went missing. Stroke. The farm went to his sons, who ended up selling the whole property to another family. A family who stayed oblivious to the fact that was the place I was last spotted. The boys on the back porch were in fact my boys. I just hadn't been around when Joanne announced he was now James, at the age of 13. I wish I could have been there to help him become a man. I apparently had a good replacement though. After 4 years, and it looked like I was gone for good, my wife met someone new. His name's Clark. They'd gotten married 6 months after they met. Clark was a real outdoorsman, hunter, fisherman, and loved to go camping. As I chased a fairy child through her playground, he was taking James and John out on trips every weekend and putting away money to help James afford his surgeries and the like. Clark had 2 kids of his own, and I was soon a memory in this house. They could survive without me. Avis was the only one who hadn't given up on me. She pursued every lead, every dead end, every chance that I could be there. She was chasing it. Stubborn girl. My girl. But she'd grown from a girl to a woman since I'd been gone, and it was like talking to a stranger. A stranger who had my chin and nose, but a stranger nonetheless. My wife did want to help me adjust though, and kindly offered the guest bedroom for me while I recovered. I'd apparently been through hell. Bones were broken and healed, muscles torn and strained beyond their limits. I was malnourished and could barely stand without my walker, and I just had nowhere to go. It was not a place I could stay though. Clark's kids looked at me like I was some boogeyman that lived down the hall. Clark and I tried to be polite to each other, but things became tense as my now ex-wife was struggling whether or not she should officially put down on paper who she should divorce. I was just in the way, but the little girl wasn't gone. Nightly, I'd see her outside my window. She'd peer in, with those big eyes, and mouth the words, "Come with me." I've told my wife I'm just going out for a walk. So, by this point, everyone is no doubt well aware of the Area 51 memes and all the hubbub surrounding them. Apparently, over 1 million people are set to storm the perimeter on September 20th of this year. Should be interesting, but let's be honest for a second. I doubt it'll happen. And even if it did, even if by some ridiculous miracle they managed to overwhelm the most powerful military on Earth and infiltrate a top-secret base, I don't think they would be exactly thrilled with the results. I'll just come right out and say it, I guess. Area 51 is a red herring. It's a distraction, and it's pretty much always been. Nothing out there but sand, reclusive scientists, and some crusty-ass lake at this point. I mean, think about it. If Area 51 is one of the most top-secret and covert black sites in the world, then why does everyone know about it? How secret can a secret be if everyone knows the secret? For God's sake, even Obama acknowledged its existence a while back. That's the whole point of it. They want you distracted, so you don't look for the others. But why take my word for it? Who am I anyways? Just some pleb on the internet that decided to cash in on a trend for some clout and perhaps a bit of that sweet, sweet karma, right? Well, yes, but actually no. That may be who I am now, but I was once a person of particular interest to the United States government. Most people knew me as Mr. Blue. Not my real name, but it is easier to pronounce. I used to be a pilot. Did that for many years and loved every second of it. I tell you, there's nothing quite like soaring through the skies and breaking the sound barrier for the first time. You might crap your pants a little, but it's all just part of the experience, really. Now, unfortunately, the type of work I did was above top secret, and for all of our safeties, I can't go into any further detail on what I actually did, or who I actually worked for. One day, I was out on a classified reconnaissance mission in a certain area where I should not have been. I'll apologize here for the vague details of certain things, but you gotta understand. The things I'm about to tell you are beyond top secret. They would kill me 10 times over for uttering a word of it, so here's to hoping that doesn't happen. Anyways, the mission was going as planned, when suddenly my instruments started going berserk on my dash. Air pressure inside the cabin just plummeted, and the speed and fuel consumption gauges looked like they were playing ping pong with each other. Everything began to rattle like crazy, and my alarms erupted into a symphony of irritation. Next thing I know, I see this bright light soar past me at an ungodly speed. The shockwave it produced was so violent that it shredded the hull of my craft. In a split second, I went from casually flying along to suddenly regaining consciousness as I plummeted headfirst towards the ground at terminal velocity. I managed to pull my chute before I splattered, but as I touched down, I almost wished I hadn't. There I was met by an awaiting entourage of at least 24 men in winter camo suits and masks. They all pointed their weapons at me and screamed in a language which I recognized as English. I tried my best to calm them down and appear unthreatening, but that didn't stop them from wrenching me into a pair of handcuffs and hauling me into one of their APCs. They began to drive away, and the real severity of the situation hit me. I was not going to be saved. The people I worked for had never said it, but it was always well known that if ever you were captured, then you were pretty much on your own. With that in mind, I had no real incentive to keep my mouth shut once they started interrogating me. It may seem cowardly, but I was not about to be brutally tortured for a former ally which would never come to bail me out. Yeah, the government says they don't torture people, but trust me, when they really want to know something, there's no tactic too extreme. And they really wanted to know something. So I told him about who I worked for, what my mission was, where I grew up, all that jazz. It was all fabricated, but they took the bait regardless thanks to their severe distrust of the Russians at the time. They were actually pretty cool after that. I mean, they wouldn't let me leave their custody, but that was better than being dead, or at least it was at first. They transported me away from my initial interrogation place, into a secure facility somewhere nearby. I was blindfolded the whole time, but from the rumbling of multiple vehicles, sounds of doors sliding open multiple times, and the distinct feeling of my stomach dropping, I could tell they had taken me somewhere deep underground. Soon after that, I stepped off the elevator and they removed my blindfold. Their leader was a guy with a stern face, thick gray beard and eyes that looked etched from concrete. He wore a black suit, with some symbol upon his heart pocket that I didn't recognize. He stepped in front of everyone and outstretched his arms while staring at me in the eye. "Welcome to your new home." An ever so slight grin slithered onto his face as he said it. I glanced down the dismal gray hallways, which seemed to stretch out further than I could see in multiple directions. They lead me down the hall on the right, past dozens of locked corridors and rooms before ushering me into a cell. My handcuffs were removed soon after, and the door slid shut behind me. The same man that had welcomed me to the facility then approached the window and pushed the intercom button. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Blue. I don't believe there is any reason why our time spent together has to be unfriendly. I apologize for all of this, but you must realize that this is a necessary precaution we must take. I hope you understand." I took a moment, then nodded back to him. "Wonderful. We will have dinner sent to you soon. If you require anything, then please notify one of the guards outside of your quarters." And with that, he and his little entourage turned and strolled down the hallway. That was my very first night in the facility I eventually came to know as FEZ. I don't think it's the official name, but I heard several personnel at the base refer to it by the acronym over the years. I still don't know exactly what it stands for. Forbidden Enclosed Ziggurat? Forsaken Evil Zoo? Forced Ejaculation Zeal? Fabulous Elf Zombies? The best I could really come up with was Fortified Experimental Zone. It makes the most sense too, all things considered. At first, it wasn't actually too bad. The staff was nice, they cooked great food, and there was plenty to see around the base. Although, every once in a while, I would hear the screams just barely echoing through the vents. They interviewed me probably 100 more times after that, and were especially interested in the craft which I was piloting. The craft in question was one of our own top-secret technologies, but unfortunately, it had been blown to smithereens by whatever that light was, so I couldn't tell them much about it. It took years of incarceration there, But eventually the staff came to trust me almost as much as they did their own comrades. We would laugh and joke with one another, and soon enough, we became what some might even consider to be friends. I became especially close with one of the scientists there named Kevin. Kevin was a smart guy, comical too, and explained quite a lot of things to me. He and I would spend hours talking on countless occasions. He was my only real glimpse into what was happening in the outside world. He'd bring in books and movies for us to enjoy together. He kept me updated on everything. And over the next 30 years, we developed a close friendship that I'll always treasure. I must have displayed some kind of intellectual potential, because they eventually started asking for my input on various curiosities stationed throughout the base. They only did it because I had sworn them complete loyalty and would never be allowed to leave the base anyways. But for me, it was just nice to feel included. The base itself was absolutely colossal. They always blindfolded me during transport to any location, but one time I caught a glimpse of the buttons in the elevator. There had to have been at least 50 of them on that panel. I remember the first time they showed me one of the lockdown blocks. There were guards posted at every cell, and I heard some very strange noises emanating around me as we traversed the halls. I thought for sure they were about to show me some horrendous beast from the depths of hell, and prepared myself accordingly as the howls of unseen things echoed throughout the halls. The lead scientist, Dr. Roosevelt, rolled back a two-way mirror curtain and my heart froze from anticipation. In the cell before us, there was nothing more than a human girl in a gray jumpsuit. She was young, maybe 5 years old or so, but there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary about her. I looked to Dr. Roosevelt, and he flexed his cranial muscles before pressing a button. I heard the sound of gas seep into the room. A few tense seconds passed, when the girl suddenly shrieked like a banshee. Her head tilted back and I saw a jagged needle-like teeth emerge from her mouth. Her jet black eyes then lurched toward us, and she lunged at the window. She struck it hard and fell back to the ground, snarling and hissing like some ravenous jackal. Dr. Roosevelt then pressed the button again, cutting the gas and posing a question.
You ever seen anything like her, Mr. Blue?
All I could do was shake my head slowly as I watched the young demon child stalk about on the other side of the glass.
They found her in the woods outside of White Horse with a freshly disemboweled man. She was eating him and appeared unaffected by the sub-zero temperature.
I suddenly felt like vomiting, but I said nothing, only stared back at the unusually gruesome little girl. What the hell was she? Unfortunately, I never was told anything else about her, and I doubt the personnel knew much more anyways. They came to show me a lot of very strange things over the years. A giant brownish-orange-haired primate that walked upright and seemed to respond to facial movements. A humanoid-shaped being that was only detectable via infrared equipment. A golden chest that would instantly kill anything that touched it. A 10-foot-tall creature wrapped in vines that emitted bouts of radiation and blended into environments with perfect camouflage. A monstrous fish at least 80 feet in length frozen in nitrogen. Various abhorrent creatures that I'm guessing were the results of relentless genetic tampering. I had never seen anything like it. All of the monstrosities housed there, and the secrets buried in their possession. They also asked for my advice on a certain paradoxical phenomenon that had plagued them as well. They told me that for decades, there had been hundreds of unsolved cases of human disappearances that seemed to defy all explanation. Young children would be found on cliff edges that they could not have possibly reached, while old and frail people would be discovered dozens of miles away from where they had last been seen only a few hours later. Most of them would never be found at all, though. I could almost see the fear dripping from their eyes as they relayed case after case of the recorded incidents, and it was clear, although not said, that they had no idea what the cause was. Unfortunately, neither did I, as it was the first I'd ever heard of the bizarre phenomenon. I told them honestly that I didn't believe my former allies were responsible, but I don't know if that made them feel better or worse. Throughout all of my years there, I'd always found one thing peculiar. After all the weird and terrifying things they showed me, there was never any mention of extraterrestrials. That's what everyone thinks these black site facilities house after all, but nevertheless, they made no mention of it. That made me smile a bit when I thought about it, because they had no idea how close they were. The closest thing they had was this weird tentacle creature with a ringed set of teeth in its mouth. It looked almost like an eel, but possessed 4 iridescent green eyes and a ring around its head. It didn't live in the water either, but instead slithered around on the ground in a very swift and very unsettling motion. They said its DNA resembled nothing like anything they had ever found on Earth before, hence the reason they believed, but were not certain of its otherworldly origins. Kevin and I got to talking back in his quarters one night, as the rest of the crew retired for the evening. He shared with me a bit of his brandy, and we were content to just chat as friends late into the night. He told me a lot about himself that he had never mentioned before. He showed me pictures of his wife and his son that had been taken from him. Kevin admitted his son had died in a car crash a couple years back, while his wife passed 2 years later of cancer. It broke my heart to hear that, and I felt sorrow for my dear friend of some 30 years. Kevin was in his early 50s, but you'd never know with the enthusiasm in his voice. It was during that conversation Kevin ended up mentioning something I found particularly interesting. He told that he believed that if an alien species existed, and were advanced enough to traverse the galactic canopy and reach Earth, then they would obviously be quite intelligent. He said he didn't believe in any of the Hollywood depictions of doomsday aliens hell-bent on destroying humanity. He thought they'd be a lot more subtle than that. Think about it. You find something intelligent which represents almost no threat to you, and the first thing you do is try to kill it? Kevin asked skeptically, as I considered his words for myself. That'd just be a waste, and no species that fancies themselves as advanced beings would do something so brash. At least I hope they wouldn't. He chuckled slightly and shot me a knowing look mixed with a unique intrigue that almost glistened in his gray eyes. Even if they thought we were destroying our own planet or something, why would they care? There are trillions of other planets in the Milky Way alone. They could pick any one of them if they wanted natural resources. I chuckled to myself, almost sensing where the conversation was headed. It's not the planets they're after, I replied. Kevin snapped, and pointed his finger at me with his face lit up. Exactly. They'd want us to study us, learn how we operate, how we organize, and how we live. Kevin's hand motions turned eccentric, and I saw his access badge jostle around his neck. He took another sip of brandy and continued. They'd probably learn more about us than we even know about ourselves. I mean, granted they have to be more intelligent. They could learn up close, understand how humans work. They'd have no need for bloodshed when they could simply, inconspicuously, integrate into human culture. They have no doubt mastered the art of altering their biology to disguise themselves as humans. I mean, that's nothing when compared with the tech they used to get here, you know? He paused from his enthused monologue and wiped the steam off his glasses. I just sat back, content to let him continue, as I found it fascinating that he could know so much. Aliens. They're not warlords. They're poets, architects, authors, musicians, beings that wish to create. It is the ultimate calling for an entity so powerful. Kevin took a deep breath and reveled in his own explanation. His speech had turned a bit slurred, and I could see his eyes floating lazily in their sockets. He then met my eyes in a look that he had never given to me before. It was a look that seemed to shed all sense of formality, and pose a question which he had long since suspected the answer to. You're not really from Russia, are you? The sudden accusation caught me off guard, and I felt my stomach drop like a lead weight. I didn't say anything, and Kevin just scoffed. You had everyone fooled. And I mean, I was too for the longest time. You had a suitable backstory, authentic sounding accent, all the alibis you gave us checked out. He paused and clasped his hands in front of him. You look so authentic too. But there was one thing you missed. One thing that you just can't fake. He looked me deep in the eyes and fell silent. He didn't have to say it, for I already knew what he meant. The eyes are impossible to truly fake. That night your craft was shot down. What were you doing here? Kevin and I maintained a prolonged eye lock before I finally responded. Reconnaissance. For the first time in decades, I dropped the Russian accent, as it was clear there was no longer any reason to lie to my dear friend.
And what did you see?
Kevin stared into the very depths of my soul as he asked, and I spoke the truth. Beauty, poetry, creators, much like us. Kevin just stared at me for the longest time, as if he were weighing my soul in his mind. I wondered what he planned to do since he had found out, but I didn't ask. Kevin eventually smiled and rose to make his way to the cell door. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a black steel pistol with a long snout. I slowly met his gaze and he chuckled. Mr. Blue, do you wish to go home? I nodded after pausing to think for a moment. Kevin looked over his weapon and primed it for use. I hope your allies can forgive us. Without another word, he flashed the security badge and the locks on the door gave way. He motioned for me to rise and follow, and so I did. Kevin glanced back and forth down the hallway, but due to the late hour, there was no one around. He and I sprinted down the corridor and onwards to one of the security booths. He flashed his badge as I hid just out of sight. He entered the room, and I heard the noise of a brief scuffle before two bright flashes ended it. Kevin re-emerged with wild eyes, and beckoned me to follow. He and I dashed down the hallway, and reached the massive main shaft elevator soon after. For the first time I entered without a blindfold, and Kevin punched a button to the top floor, and the security code required to power it. Security system will be down for a good half hour, but automated distress beacons have already been activated. That gives us about 8 minutes. Kevin dropped the clip from his pistol and popped in a fresh one. I saw spackles of blood on his glasses and cheek, and a frenzied look in his eye. Here, take this. He reached out his hand and held something which I had not seen in decades, the old radio from my craft. I took it, and he and I met eyes as the elevator door opened. It was back to running after that. But a few minutes of it, and we had reached an underground parking facility. Kevin quickly unlocked a nearby vehicle, and the two of us hopped in as he fired it up. The engine roared to life, and Kevin accelerated through the lot. A moment later, and we exited the underground facility, and I saw my first vision of the night sky in over 4 decades. There were men stationed at the perimeter gates that attempted to stop us, but Kevin didn't flinch. He crashed right through the wire fence on the perimeter, causing multiple lights to activate in our wake. I heard a siren blaring behind us, and the silhouettes of people dashing throughout the snow.
There's a suit in the back. Put it on.
I did as he requested without question, and fit the snug polyester garment over my body. It covered every square inch from foot to the nape of my neck, and felt incredibly comfortable.
There's a dial on your right side. You can use it to mask your body heat. They're gonna be after you.
He tossed a map into my lap and continued barking instructions.
You can contact your friends with that radio, right?
His eyes flashed to me as he slid onto the main road and away from the compound. You can contact your friends with that radio, right? His eyes flashed to me as he slid onto the main road and away from the compound.
Yes.
Kevin nodded.
Make your way north. They won't be expecting that. There's a river up there about 30 miles away through the forest. Once you find it, head east until you find a small town. Ask the guy at the post office for Mr. White. He's a friend of mine who's agreed to help you. He'll take it from there.
I tried to digest the flow of information as best as I could and remain confident. It had all just happened so suddenly.
I stashed you some MREs in the bag. Should last you a good couple weeks.
Kevin then swerved around a corner and reoriented us onto a new dark road. In the sudden influx of adrenaline, a sudden though occurred to me. What happens to you? Kevin didn't seem to want to acknowledge the question.
Forget about that. Just get back to your people.
Behind us, a flurry of lights suddenly ascended into the night sky. The whirring sound of rotary blades then pierced the tranquil canopy of the blustery night.
Shit! I'd hoped I could get you a bit farther than this.
He suddenly slammed on the brakes. My head lurched forward and the car spun back and forth along the icy road.
Take this too.
He handed his long barrel pistol over, and I hesitantly took it. He and I then met eyes for one final time. This is where we say goodbye, Mr. Blue. Why are you doing this for me? Kevin sighed, and I saw a certain sorrow swirl into his ironclad pupils. He stayed silent a moment, and only when the sounds of approaching engines grew louder was he spurred a reply.
You don't belong here. You don't belong in the cage. I don't know where you come from, but I want you to see the ones you love again.
His eyes began to water, and he jostled his neck before looking me in the eye one final time.
I hope you don't think of us as captors or kidnappers. I hope you see us as you see yourself. I just hope you can understand.
A single tear then rolled down his cheek. I put my hand on his shoulder. I always have, and I always will. Thank you, Kevin. I then held out my hand and he grabbed it tight as we shared one final moment before I ventured into the blizzard. The journey from then on was long and arduous, with me spending weeks trudging through snow and frozen forests. Hounds, men, and machines pursued me for days, but somehow I was able to elude their efforts. The terrain was brutal, but eventually I managed to find the river which Kevin had mentioned. By that point, all of my pursuers had long since gone silent. I followed the river and found a town, and soon after the man known as Mr. White. He was a kind man, and gladly invited me into his house to avoid the agents. It is there that I have been ever since, awaiting my allies' arrival. They were stunned to hear from me again, but not as stunned as I was to find out the radio was still functional. They weren't entirely sure whether they could even trust me anymore, but I didn't leave them much of a choice when I threatened to go public and expose them to the world. They finally agreed, but admitted it would be months before they could reach me. I expected as much, and thankfully Mr. White allowed me to stay with him and await their eventual arrival. I found out soon after that my dear friend Kevin, to whom I owe my freedom and life, had been found deceased. The authorities ruled it a suicide, gunshot wound to the back of the head, but obviously I have my doubts about that. It truly broke me to learn of my one true friend's demise, but I knew it was what he expected. I like to think that is why he chose to do it, and furthermore, it is the reason I'm here posting this now. Kevin's legacy deserves to live on, and this is the only way I know how to do it. And with that, we have come full circle to this message you're reading right now. To address the original topic, Area 51 is indeed a ruse. Kevin held a lot of power in his previous role, and he told me all about the operation. The real prize is the FEZ, my former prison, somewhere in eastern Alaska, buried beneath the snow with all sorts of abhorrent things in its clutches. If you're going to storm anywhere, that should be the place. Just remember to pack a coat. Kevin was a smart man, brilliant even. If you've managed to make it this far, then I'd like to think you are someone like him. Brave, curious, and with an almost innate sense of wonder that cannot be satiated. It is my hope that Kevin's ideas will live on through you. My allies would never approve of this message, but I know now that they are wrong. Truth is something that all sentient beings should be allowed to perceive, despite how unpleasant it may be to hear it. It was Kevin's belief that the beings he knows as aliens are already here, that insisted of murdering humans as is often portrayed in stories. They would blend in. Take keen interest in human culture, society, and art. Write books, poetry, and music in hopes of connecting to something truly extraordinary, something that reminds them of themselves. If Kevin is right, then maybe one day, you'll even stumble upon such a story for yourself. Maybe you'll think it nothing more than a work of fiction to entertain you for a while. Maybe the author of said theoretical story would seem like nothing more than your run-of-the-mill internet user. He probably wouldn't just come right out and say it, because that would be entirely too corny. He would probably just leave you the pieces, and hope that you could understand the truth for yourself. Maybe you truly are like Kevin, drawn to mystery and prepared to entertain the fantastic. Maybe you'll just dismiss the implications of the words before you, because you don't dare believe something so outlandish. Because in the end, truth is not the problem, belief is. Maybe someone will understand who, or more importantly, what I really am. Maybe it'll be you. Either way, I have been away for a very long time. It is time for me to go home. Thank you, Kevin. I'll always uphold our agreement. Can I check your ticket, please? I handed the ticket that had been twirling around in my hands for the past hour to the flight attendant. She nodded at it approvingly before producing a sheet of paper from the file that she was holding and placing it inside my folded ticket. Have a nice flight, she commented enthusiastically before handing my ticket back to me. I grabbed my ticket and stared at the folded sheet of paper inside my ticket curiously before finding my seat. Once I settled down in my seat, I removed the folded sheet of paper from my ticket and placed the ticket in my bag. Upon unfolding the sheet of paper, I realized it was a handwritten note. The handwriting seemed rushed. I've transcribed the note from memory here. Rules for surviving this flight. Do not speak of this sheet to any passenger. You're the only human on this flight. Check the time on your phone after reading the sheet. All rules will apply based on the time of your phone. During the first hour of the flight, do not talk to anyone. People may try to talk to you, but ignore them completely. During the second hour of the flight, you may start talking again, but if anyone mentioned the window, do not look outside the window in any circumstances. If you hear a child crying in the cabin, immediately run to the bathroom. If the screen of your entertainment console suddenly goes black, immediately look away and do not stare at it. During the third hour of the flight, the captain will make an announcement. Follow the instructions. During the fourth hour of the flight, do not sit in your seat. If you make it past the fourth hour, you'll need to spend the rest of the flight evading the chaser. You'll know who the chaser is when you see them. The captain will make an announcement of the plane landing. As soon as you hear this announcement, push your way to the exit door and open it. You'll find that the outside is simply a black void. Jump into it without hesitation. I reread the rules again while chuckling. Did they give one of these to every passenger, or was I somehow randomly chosen for this prank? I checked the time on my phone just to humor the list. 7:13 a.m. So this would be the first hour of the flight. Suddenly a young man walked over to my seat and sat right beside me. I gave him a casual side glance and saw that he was carrying what looked to be a laptop bag. Great, I thought. He'll work on whatever he's doing and leave me alone for the flight. The man didn't even bother to exchange a single word with me as he settled down in his seat and put on his seatbelt. He stared straight ahead and completely avoided me. I let him be and started to fiddle with my flight console. Some people just like to be left alone, I guess. Soon enough, the captain made an announcement of the plane starting, and the steady hum of the plane engine started to vibrate the entire cabin. The plane started to accelerate until the G-force pushed me into my seat. Moments later, I felt the plane rising into the air. I'm typically not scared of flights, but getting on a flight always makes me a bit nervous. This time, though, my stomach was in knots and beads of sweat were running down my forehead. My instincts told me I was stepping into danger, grave danger. I dismissed my thoughts and that awful gut feeling, chalking it down to feeling a little creeped out by the note. The young man on my left suddenly tapped on my shoulder. I jolted up like I'd just been electrocuted. Even through my jacket, his hand felt cold and heavy, like a dead person's hand. I turned around and faced the young man. His face seemed wrong. You know how those realistic human robots can creep people out because of how close to human they are? Yet subconsciously, we can tell that they aren't human. This man was giving me that same unsettling feeling, and his facial features were just artificial in a way I couldn't place. Maybe it was his eyes, a little too big, the pupils abnormally dilated. Or maybe it was his nose, not exactly in the center of his face. Or perhaps it was his mouth, lips way too thin and long. Don't get me wrong, he didn't look obnoxiously fake. In fact, it was those very subtle blemishes in his facial features that made him look like something trying to look like human. And then he spoke. His voice was normal. Upon hearing his voice, the man seemed to look normal too, and I thought I was just freaking out for no reason. "Hey, do you wear headphones?" he asked. That was a weird question to ask. Did he want headphones? I was about to open my mouth to speak when he spoke again. "How would you feel if I cut your hand off right now?" What was disturbing wasn't the nature of the question itself, but the fact that he spoke in such a calm manner. It was as if he was asking me how my day was. Suddenly my mind went to the list of rules that I had subconsciously been squeezing in my hand. The first rule said to not talk to anyone on the flight no matter how much they try to talk to you. I decided to ignore the man. He seemed really weird anyways, and if I was being honest, the list of rules wasn't the reason I chose to ignore him. He stopped pestering me and returned to work on his laptop. I looked over at his laptop slowly, and gasped at what I saw on his screen. He had a photo of me on his screen. That's it. Nothing else. Just a full screen photo of me. Before I could process that properly, I looked over at his keyboard and noticed that it wasn't a standard keyboard. In fact, it really wouldn't even count as a keyboard. It was made up of oddly shaped keys, all marked with strange letters that I doubt existed. The man continued to stare intently at the photo of me on his screen. It was then that I realized that the list of rules wasn't a joke. Suddenly a flight attendant popped out of nowhere and asked me, "Sir, is this man bothering you?" "Yes, he is," I replied before my voice caught up in my throat. In under a second, everyone in the cabin snapped their heads around until they were staring directly at me. Their faces, they all looked wrong, inhuman. Slowly their long, thin lips curled into wide smiles and red tears started to roll down their faces. What had moments before been a fairly typical flight had now turned into a nightmare. I sat there, cornered in my seat as the entire cabin of people had their faces turned to me, eyes locked with me. Red tears were rolling down their uncanny faces, and their lips were curled into impossibly wide smiles. The flight attendant that had tricked me into talking to her also did the same thing, now completely silent. I waited for them to jump me, to attack me, but they did absolutely nothing. Seconds dragged into minutes, yet the people just stared. They didn't make an effort to move. It looked like they were locked in place, just staring at me. As the initial shock wore off, and my ravaged heartbeat started to slow down, I started to think about what to do. I'd obviously broken the first rule, but apart from being a little unnerved, it hadn't caused much harm to me. The plane's PA system turned on again, and the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming across some unexpected turbulence. Please remain in your seats to stay safe." His voice was monotone and void of emotion. Every single syllable made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Everyone in the cabin seemed to dismiss my presence at that moment and return to their usual things. The cabin returned to normal, and I nearly convinced myself that I just had a very realistic nightmare. It wasn't until I saw the young man's laptop next to me that I realized it wasn't over yet. His laptop was still the same with a keyboard from another world, and most importantly, he still had a picture of me on his screen. He continued to stare at it, and tapped the keys on his keyboard as if he was typing something. I reread the list of rules and noticed the 7th rule. During the 3rd hour of the flight, the captain will make an announcement. Follow the instructions. The rule sheet stated that the captain would make an announcement during the 3rd hour of the flight. Yet, as I checked my phone, I realized I was still in the 1st hour of the flight. Either breaking the first rule had changed the complete course of things, or the rule sheet simply didn't account for all scenarios. I desperately hoped that the latter was true because otherwise, the precious rule sheet that was supposed to get me out of here would now be worthless. A sudden jolt across the whole cabin interrupted my thoughts. The captain hadn't lied about the turbulence. In fleeting moments, the entire plane was shaking. There was nothing against looking through the window in the rules, apart from during the 2nd hour, so I pulled up the blind on the tiny circular plane window and gasped when I saw the outside. All I saw was a thick black void that seemed to undulate like rich black velvet. I saw the lights from the plane start to get warped and twisted as the beams traveled through the void. Don't get me wrong, the void wasn't just completely black. No, it was full of light rays twisting and warping. The best I can describe the void's movement is like an ocean of thick black waves. My mind went to every sci-fi movie and book I'd ever read, and I entertained the thought that I was inside a wormhole. Or perhaps a black hole. How the regular Boeing plane managed to not get crushed in this physics-bending space was an impossible question to answer. I slowly turned my head away from the window. It took a lot of willpower to look away, as if something from those inky black depths hypnotized me. Everyone in the cabin seemed completely oblivious to what was happening and continued to go about their regular business. I checked the time on my phone and my heart skipped a beat. An entire hour had passed in just those few moments I spent looking out into the void. I quickly looked over at the rules sheet to see what I would have to do for the second hour of the flight. During the second hour of the flight, you may start talking again, but if anyone mentions the window, do not look outside the window in any circumstances. While the rule did state it was okay to talk, I really didn't want to talk to anyone in this cabin. I also reread the rule about going to the washroom when I hear a child crying, and also not looking at my in-flight entertainment console if the screen turns black. It all seemed pretty standard stuff, and I thought I'd seen the worst already. This gave me newfound motivation to follow all the rules to the dot and get out of here quickly. I started to head out to the washroom to relieve myself, knowing that I'd be busy during the third and fourth hours of the flight. As I was walking to the washroom, a woman frantically caught up with me. She seemed absolutely frightened. "Hey, are you also stuck here?" she asked while looking me up and down. "Did you also get the set of rules?" I said. "Yes, but I lost the sheet. Can I just read yours?" she pleaded. I considered it for a moment and decided to give her my sheet because she seemed really desperate. It felt good to have someone else be in the same situation as me because now I could rely on someone else to help me out. I gave her the sheet and she thanked me profusely. After giving it a quick read, much to my relief, she handed it back to me. "I'm Sarah, by the way," she said. "Nice to meet you. I'm Ethan," I replied. "We need to get out of here, and I think our best bet is following these rules." "That's right. I'm glad I'm not the only person here on this flight," she said. "About the others, well, they don't seem human to me." She seemed to have calmed down a bit too quickly. It felt like she was putting up a facade, but I chalked it up to being on edge from the situation I was in. "So, I guess we got another half an hour until the third hour starts," she said. We suddenly started to hear the shrill cries of a child in the cabin. She immediately took my hand and rushed us both over to the washroom. There we spent the next few minutes listening to those shrill cries get more and more inhuman as the minutes passed. Just before they finally died down, they were high-pitched shrieks that still ring in my ears to this day. My left ear started to literally bleed as the frequency of the sound ruptured my eardrum. Sarah seemed unfazed by the sound. I guess it affects different people differently. Soon enough, it was the third hour of the flight, and the captain made another announcement in his emotionless monotone voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please proceed to the front of the plane." Absolutely no one in the cabin moved. I looked at Sarah and she nodded at me, giving me the affirmative to go to the front. We both started to walk to the front of the plane, pacing through rows and rows of people comfortably lounging in their seats. No one seemed to have even heard the announcement. At the front of the plane, I saw the door to the pilot's cockpit open. I walked inside with Sarah right behind me and noticed two things. There was no pilot. Outside the plane, I could see a vast red land, with fire and lava crisscrossing the dried earth like rivers and purple trees dotting the barren landscape. I stared into the outside, shocked at the otherworldly landscape. The place wasn't uninhabited though. Large concrete buildings were concentrated in several areas. Where we had arrived, I had no idea. Sarah started to laugh behind me. It was at that moment that all the pieces of the puzzle clicked together in my head. I realized why Sarah felt so off. She knew what time it was on my phone even though she never checked it. There was no way she could have known which hour of the flight it was unless she had her own phone, which she never did. She didn't get affected by that shrill, high-pitched scream in the cabin. She was acting way too calm, like she knew exactly what was happening. As I felt Sarah's nails dig into my shoulders, I realized that the list of rules had failed me when I broke the first rule. I had changed the course of things and those rules no longer had a time frame. Sarah continued to dig her nails into my shoulders and pierced my skin through my jacket. She leaned in close and whispered, "I am the Chaser." I was stuck in a bit of a pickle. The Chaser had tricked me and cornered me in the cockpit, and the plane seemed to have traveled into another dimension. I probably would have had a panic attack and mental breakdown at that moment, but I had something more important to deal with. The nails of Sarah, or the Chaser I guess, continued to dig into my shoulder and stab through my jacket into my skin. She seemed to possess inhuman strength from the way she easily punctured my jacket and then my skin with just a blunt nail. But as I slowly turned my head around, I realized Sarah was truly just a facade. She had transformed into something else entirely. Her skin had gone completely white like a sheet of paper, and her fingers now ended in jagged, sharp yellow fingernails. Her face had warped into a misfigured eyes, nose and mouth that barely resembled Sarah that I had gotten to know. I quickly pushed back against her and kind of fell on her to push myself and her out of the cockpit. You don't truly know what you're capable of until you get that adrenaline surge in a survival situation. When your primal instincts take over, you don't think about anything you do. And then as soon as I was free from her grasp, I ran. I won't bore you with the details of the next 30 minutes of me running back and forth around the plane to avoid the Chaser. At first, I thought the other passengers would react, maybe catch me or something, but they were all gone. The entire plane was empty, and it was only me and the Chaser. I was starting to get tired and lose energy when the captain's voice broadcasted over the PA system once more. "The plane is landing at our destination. Please buckle your seatbelts." The Chaser took one final look at me before disappearing to the back of the plane. It puzzled me how the captain was now back in the cockpit and landing the plane. Curiosity overtook me and I thought I'd seen the worst already, so I decided to walk to the front of the plane and check the cockpit again. The door to the cockpit was open, and I could see a single man with his back to me operating the controls. He seemed normal enough, but after what I had experienced on this plane, I knew the last person I wanted to bother would be the captain. I swear I saw him turn his head around and look at me as I turned around and walked back. The plane landed eventlessly, and those emergency rubber slides also opened up to serve as exits in a place where there were no airports. Before I left the plane, I salvaged as much food and water as I could. Some of you may say that I should have stayed in the plane. While that would have been a good move, how long would I last there? Days? At most weeks? It's best I get myself used to this new dimension I found myself in, rather than sit there and then look for food when starving. And of course, I still can't forget the Chaser, who I believe is still on the plane. The landscape was an endless red desert. The only things that stood out in the landscape were the occasional purple trees and the towns of concrete buildings. The heat was unbearable. I looked up at the sky and saw 3 large suns in different positions, all radiating their heat and light onto this planet. The ground was incredibly dry and I doubt the place ever received rain. In fact, there were several ravines that were filled with lava and molten rock. I knew I couldn't even survive a day in this heat, and had already completely soaked my clothes in sweat. I started to walk over to the closest concrete city I could find. It only took me 10 minutes to walk there, but those 10 minutes were absolute agony as I struggled to keep on walking in the heat. The beams from the 3 suns burnt the skin on the back of my neck and ears as I walked those 10 minutes. Just when I was about to pass out, I found the shade of a concrete building and threw myself into it. The relief was instant. And while that temperature didn't suddenly drop, it was 100 times better than being in the open. I finished an entire bottle of water in one sip and continued to lie down on the floor, nearly passing out from exhaustion and the heat. I didn't notice the suited man when he walked in front of me. "Welcome to hell, lost soul." He said that phrase like he had said it 1,000,000 times and was bored of it. He wore a black suit even in the sweltering heat and didn't seem to be a tiny bit uncomfortable. Hell? I asked, clearly confused at this man's statement. It may have been the heat getting to my head though, because that would have not been confusing to me and would actually explain the previous events. "Yes, son, this is hell. You're an unexpected visit though. Usually we keep track of who's coming in." He said in a tone similar to one a teacher would use when their student asks a dumb question. "Don't worry though, It's not a rare occurrence to have people that come and go. I'm not sure if you'll be able to leave though, so I'll set you up with what you're going to have to do for eternity," he said, as if he was just doing his regular job. "What do I have to do?" I asked, unable to fathom what the horrible task must be. "Oh, it's simple. We will take you under the ground where the beings that run your world will consume your fear and eventually your soul as sustenance," he said in a cold tone. I immediately stood up and began to run, but no matter how far I ran, the man seemed to be right beside me. He wasn't running, no, he was just standing still, waiting for me to give up. I tried my best to keep going, but the sweltering heat didn't make it any better. I was far away from the concrete city now, but the man suddenly snapped his fingers and I was back under the shade of the building. "You can't escape," he smiled. That's how I learned the first rule of hell. There's no escape. But I got out, didn't I? How else would I be posting here? All I can say is that I'm incredibly lucky. The man snapped his fingers once more, and we were down in what looked to be a vast underground cellar. I saw people being tortured in each cell by unimaginable creatures. I got a headache looking at those creatures and could not look at them for a long time. The geometry of their bodies did not make sense. They had completely different parts. They weren't even composed of earthly colors. These were new colors that I have no words to describe. I saw a man who was tied down to a bed as an entity peeled his skin off him. His screams carried so much agony that they made me feel the pain. To this day, I will never get the screams in that cellars out of my head. I saw another woman being slowly dipped into lava. Her burnt body seemed to regenerate as soon as she was pulled out. The creature kept on doing it again and again, showing no signs of stopping. As the man walked me through this horrible place, I only had one word on mind. "Why?" "Your souls are very powerful. We feed on your fear and suffering. If we didn't do this, the earth and your reality would not exist. As a return for letting you live a life on the paradise known as Earth, you give us your souls. Don't worry though, this doesn't happen for eternity. Eventually, your souls are fully consumed and no more than empty husks. You will find plenty of wasted souls roaming around up above," the man explained. "So, there's no heaven?" I pleaded. "What about God?" "There's no heaven. God has long left your kind behind. He considers your kind a failure, and let us deal with you as we please." I stood there in the underground torture chamber as a suited man told me about the afterlife and how it works. You know what's worse than that though? Monday mornings. Okay, maybe not. I was quite literally dead, and now this man was gonna chuck me in a cell and torture me for eternity, except that didn't really happen. Don't worry. You really think we waste souls here first? No. We first make them work. Make them keep the barrier between your reality and ours strong, the suited man said, immediately putting away the worst of my worries. Then almost immediately, a weird being made entirely of light appeared next to us. The being did not have a definite shape, and looking at it was like looking at the sun. It seemed to stand there and communicate with the suited man before leaving. With the snap of his fingers, the suited man teleported us away from that chamber, and we were now instead inside what I could only guess were one of the concrete buildings. "There's been a mistake, Ethan," the man said in sorrow. "What happened?" I asked, and then suddenly the world started to warp around me as if reality was a still body of water that was now rippling from an interruption. Colors started to swirl around like watercolor, and before I knew it, I found myself in the plane again with a sheet of rules clutched in my hand and the same young man next to me. I had been given a second chance, and this time, things would be a little different. I immediately looked away from the young man and ignored his cries for attention. I ignored the flight attendant too, and suddenly the whole cabin was yelling at me. Their shouts nearly caught my attention, and made me turn around to tell them to just shut up, but I stayed put and stared at my lap. Suddenly the young man brought his head on my lap and stared directly into my eyes with those uncanny features. I could feel my heart in my throat as he slowly said in my mother's voice, "Ethan," he teased as his voice shifted from my mother's to my dad's, and then to the voices of some of my friends. I trembled and tried to avoid completely disturbing features of his face, so close to me, by closing his eyes, which only made him angrier. It seems the creatures had no way to touch me until I acknowledged them though, so I was safe. The other rules were a breeze to follow except for the chaser one. The chaser was still Sarah, and she started to come towards me as soon as the hour started. I continued to run, but Sarah followed after me, calling for me. I tried to not get myself into a dead end and continued looping around the seats until the hour passed. My legs were tired and I was utterly defeated. Soon the captain made a landing announcement, and this time, I managed to jump into the void. The void accepted me as it started to wrap its tendrils around me. All I could see was a thick, rich, velvety black as I fell and fell for who knows how long. I started to hear the rhythmic beeping of some sort of machinery and tried to focus on it until I realized what it was. I woke up in a hospital bed, covered from head to toe in casts. Apparently, I had been involved in a serious car crash. The doctors say I was dead for a total of 3 minutes and miraculously survived. You might ask me why I didn't tell the doctors about my experience. They would never believe me. After years of rehab, I gained the ability to be able to do most of the things and life started to become normal again. That is, until the suited man visited me again. It was a cool Saturday evening, and I was going for a walk in the park to try and push myself to improve my health. My athletic ability hasn't been the same since the accident. He walked over to me and I immediately froze as he held his hands up defensively in front of him to signify he meant no harm. "I just want to explain some things," he offered sincerely. "You were never supposed to go to hell, Ethan. It wasn't your time yet. When the soul's time comes, it is taken to hell in a sort of purgatory, you could say. It manifests differently depending on the person, and your own unique purgatory was the plane. The flight attendant that gave you the list of rules realized the error and gave you the list to give you a chance to fight your way out of the purgatory and return to Earth. It was not in our power to return you ourselves, therefore you had to do it. I found you in hell unaccounted for and was ready to put your soul at work when another higher being told me to send you back on the plane and give you a second chance, so you could return," he explained. "Cool, but why do you find the need to tell me that?" I asked. "Because this time, your time has come for real, and I see it a personal responsibility to finish off what we were on to last time," he said as his lips curled into a smile full of malice. I ran away from the man immediately, but I know my death is near. All I can tell you guys is, there's no heaven. Enjoy your life while you have it. I have seen and killed real evil. I'm not talking about people. Well, I've killed plenty of them too. But no man compares to real evil. No man is capable of the same atrocities and chaos that real evil inflicts. I hunted giants during my first deployment to Afghanistan, and they're the epitome of evil. I'm a US Army Ranger. I've been serving in Bath for 12 years, and I've seen and killed the scariest shit imaginable. I haven't told anyone for fear of what would happen to my family and me. I lay awake most nights, wishing I could tell my wife what I've encountered, my mind and soul breaking from the weight I have to carry. I relive the horrors every night when I go to sleep. I've kept it all to myself until I found no sleep. I recognized many of the stories posted by my brothers in the Spec Ops and military communities, and realized I finally had an outlet. I've checked in on some of the posters to confirm they're still breathing. I guess the government assumes that no sleep is fake, so they don't monitor it. What I'm about to share with you is all real. You deserve to know what lies in the shadows. You deserve to know what they're hiding from you. And you deserve to know about the men and women that have sacrificed their lives to keep the forces of evil at bay. Skip the next few paragraphs if you're knowledgeable of the Spec Ops community. It's important that you have a basic understanding before I get to the crazy shit. I promise you that the stories that follow will be worth the wait. Army Rangers are a Tier 2 Spec Ops unit, along with Green Berets, SEALs, Marine Force Recon, and MARSOC. Tier 1 consists of CAG, Delta Force, DevGru, SEAL Team 6, and numerous groups that I won't speak about. There is a value in being unknown to the world. We're often joined by Tier 1 groups from around the world, which are usually the SAS, Brits, Aussies, and Kiwis, and Joint Task Force 2, Canadians. Tier 2 consists of the top 0.1% of the military. Tier 1 generally only recruits the best from Tier 2. We all trained for years for selection, qualification schools. We all possess top secret security clearances, or higher. We're all very good at killing, and we all will forfeit our freedom or lives, and possibly those of our families, if we share what we've done. Our government utilizes Spec Ops units because we work in secret. We're the best. We're well funded, and we can deploy anywhere in the world without congressional approval. Declaration of war. You'd be shocked by how many countries, and which countries, that we're currently serving in. Our track record is impeccable, but usually close to the public. I'm 34, a major, and have been serving in BAT, Ranger Battalion, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, for the past 12 years. I am from Kansas City and a Mizzou grad. I'm currently attending a military school, SGSOC, at Fort Leavenworth while I work on my PhD from Kansas State and await my next deployment to some hellhole. The good news is that I have plenty of time to share my experiences before I head back out. My first encounter with real evil happened during my first deployment to Afghanistan. It was 2009. I remember checking the computers in Kuwait while awaiting the C-130 to take me to Bagram, Air Base in Afghanistan. I was excited the Chiefs had just signed Matt Castle, thinking we'd be headed to the Super Bowl soon. Talk about naive. Anything to get my mind off what awaited me. Death, paralysis, loss of limbs. I was 24, just a year out of college, and didn't even have a serious girlfriend. I had a lot to live for. I pushed it out of my mind, leaning on the fact that I'd be leading the baddest motherfuckers on the planet. My Rangers would get it done and I'd make my Baton Rangers proud. I flew into Bagram at 2200 with a couple dozen other soldiers, wearing our IOTVs, bulletproof vests, and ACHs, Kevlar helmets. The C-130 was dark, only the dim green lights illuminating the inside. Those around me glowed in alien green. The pilot gave us a warning to strap in as he began his descent, circling over the airfield and shooting flares to ensure no RPGs could hit us on the way down. Some fobbit whimpered and cried in the corner, while an NCO making eye contact with me yelled at the soldier to stop being a bitch as he rolled his eyes with a small grin. The ramp lowered, slamming hard on the cement runway with a loud metallic crack. I grabbed my gear and head out in the dark. A huge staff sergeant yelled, "LT, get your shit and follow me!" Staff Sergeant Vasquez, 6'5" and built like a brick shithouse, shaved head looking like Hispanic version of The Rock. He led me to the hooch in the Spec Ops gated community on base. It was a storage container, which had 3 sleeping quarters divided by plywood. He told me to throw my gear on and head to the TOC, Tactical Operations Center. The commander had a mission for me. I stood in the TOC, in full gear, M4 hanging from my sling and Glock in the leg holster, looking at the dozens of TV screens and soldiers monitoring radios. The room was full of chatter, too much chatter. Something big was going on. My commander, Lieutenant Colonel LTC Williams, introduced himself, telling me I was in the big leagues now. Shut the fuck up and do exactly what Captain Stone said. He then ushered me into a side room. I looked around and realized this wasn't going to be a normal mission. Staff Sergeant Vasquez sat at a table with 8 others, their sleeves bare, no Ranger scrolls. I realized it was an ODA, 8-man team of Green Berets. My commander started his brief. Team 329. Team numbers, names changed to protect identities. Went missing approximately 4 hours ago in a desolate portion of the Al-Assay Mountains. Their last transmission came in broken. They were escorting a CIA operative to a cave high in the mountains. We haven't been told anything else. We're sending in Team 357 for search and rescue. LT, you and Vasquez are tagging along. Your platoon is on mission for another few days, so you're gonna get some experience, learning from CPT Stone and his team. The S2 intel officer stepped in and provided as much detail as he could for the mission, while my commander pulled me out of the room. LT, we don't know what the fuck is going on. The CIA are being shitbags as usual. They've left the teams and us in the dark. I want you and Vasquez to gather as much intel as possible while you're there. These fuckers are getting our guys killed and we don't know what for. I met CPT Stone and his team at their vehicles. 3 HMMWVs that had been stripped down. They basically looked like dune buggies with miniguns mounted on top. CPT Stone looked me in the eyes. He had a steely resolve, but there was worry behind his eyes. He raised his hand above his head and said, "LT, aim high." I responded, "Roger, sir. Headshots," gathering that he meant the enemy had body armor on. He looked at me again, fiercely serious, and fully extended his arm above his head. "No, aim high." I nodded and we all loaded into the vehicles. Is he saying they'll hit us from the top of the cave? I remember thinking. I pushed it from my mind as we took off. We left Bagram, still pitch black, wearing NVGs as we rode through the hot desert night. I was constantly scanning the perimeter, waiting to be ambushed on the roads. I looked back at the huge bearded team guys. They were all looking straight ahead. They all seemed to know something that I didn't. They had zero concern for the road and seemed to be a million miles away in their minds. It was as if the real threat far exceeded what we see from the Hajis en route. We hit the Alisay Mountains a couple hours later, pulling into a small combat outpost, COP, and dismounting. "Ammo, grenades, water, and NVGs," is all that Captain Stone said. I grabbed my assault pack as one of the team guys tossed me a few grenades and extra mags. We stepped off from the COP, moving up the mountain in a wedge formation. I remember thinking we were invincible as I looked at these huge warriors, carrying M4s, Scars, M2 sniper rifles, and 203 grenade launchers. These guys had probably taken down entire Al-Qaeda units by themselves. They had the look, the one you earned from taking the lives of other men. I felt like I was superhuman. Little did I know what awaited us. We came upon the cave just as the sun was cresting the moon. The sky was blood red, as the darkness faded into oblivion. The cave looked like the mouth of a giant serpent. The opening was on the other side of a sheer ledge that stood 10 to 15 feet high. As we approached, Captain Stone said, "Eyes up! Keep your distance!" As we got within 100 meters of the cave, I saw something shiny on the ground. I signaled for the squad to halt and called CPT Stone cover. It was a radio. The mic had been ripped off and the radio had a massive dent. Dried black blood caked the side of it. Chunks of skin and tissue littered the area. Captain Stone said, "Shit, James," as his face turned to anger. He stood up as one of the team guys pulled out some climbing gear. He fastened it, and we all climbed the ropes as silently as we could. I was last to climb, cresting the ledge and seeing the squad in the prone, pointing their weapons at the cave opening. As soon as I was up, the squad stood and started to move slowly toward the cave. One of the team guys, took point and took a few steps toward the cave. I was overcome with the worst smell imaginable, like sulfur, shit, and rotten milk. I began to get an intense feeling of despair and hopelessness. It wasn't the adrenaline rush and heightened senses of a normal engagement. It felt evil. Just as he put his hand up to motion for us to stop, I heard the deepest, loudest roar emanate from the cave. It sounded like a cross between a man yelling and the roar of a lion, but blended in an impossible manner. Before we knew it, something huge came charging out of the cave and impaled with a massive spear, lifting him 15 feet off the ground. I looked in amazement at what looked like a huge man. It was absolutely massive, standing 13 to 14 feet tall, its shoulders as wide as I am tall. It had long red hair and a shaggy red beard. It had a loin cloth on and leather sacks on its feet. We were all momentarily frozen. There was an absolute sense of pure, unbridled evil that emanated from this thing. Finally, Captain Stone yelled, "Headshots!" We all unleashed a barrage of rounds into its head and face. 9 soldiers, all emptying 2 to 3 magazines worth of ammo into the beast. It dropped who was still skewered on the spear, and began to charge me, the ground shaking with every step. It looked at me with such cruelty and disdain, open mouth revealing 2 rows of giant teeth. It felt like an ant that was about to be stomped on by a child. It yelled something, in another language, that I didn't understand, its voice splitting my eardrums. As it reached out its massive hand to grab me, it finally fell, riddled with bullets, its head and face caved in. Captain Stone empties another magazine of 7.62 into the giant's head, before going to check on E's body. It took 3 of us to lift the spear and another 2 to pull E's body off the spear shaft, which makes a sucking noise as we pull him off. The spear had ripped out his entire chest cavity. His ribs were splintered and sticking straight out, like crooked, jagged teeth. All of his internal organs lay in a pile on the desert floor. The 5 of us covered in warm, sticky blood. Captain Jones called in the sit rep and requested transport. We all sat down for what seemed like an eternity of silence. Normally, after a mission, we joke around and tell the most inappropriate stories. It's a tradition that makes the horror of war feel a little more acceptable. Today was different. Every eye was glazed over. Everyone sat, facing away from the giant. We had seen, felt real evil. This thing was not a man. Being in its presence brought on a feeling of hopelessness that I can't begin to describe. It was like all of the joy, hope, and good had been sucked out of the world, replaced by despair and agony. We finally stood up and examined the beast. It had 6 fingers on each hand. Its hands were large enough to wrap around my torso. Its mouth revealed 2 rows of teeth, with each tooth being length of my finger. The hair on its head and beard was in a natural shade of red. I wrapped my hands around one of its fingers in an attempt to lift its arm. I couldn't even get its hand off the ground. The spear, still dripping with blood, weighed as much as the logs we use in training, that require 6 men to lift above our heads. We stepped into the cave, seeing hundreds of human bones. Chunks of skin, tissue, and military uniforms littered the pile. In the corner were hundreds of weapons. Modern guns like M4s and FALs, rusted out AK-47s, and ancient rotting swords, spears, and shields. It's like it was keeping trophies. An unmarked Chinook showed up 15 minutes later. A bunch of spooks, CIA ops, walked out. One said, "Grab the Neff." The team sergeant yelled, "Fucking clowns! Thanks for the intel." The agents never made eye contact. They unloaded a forklift and cargo net, wrapping up the beast and loading him into the Chinook. Captain Stone motioned for me to come over. I asked if he was doing his closure report, a brief officers have to fill out to summarize battles. He said, "No, wait for it." Shortly after, one of the agents walked over and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a pre-filled closure report, detailing how we had been ambushed by Al-Qaeda. E had been killed before we scared them off. He said, "Sign here." Captain Stone signed and motioned for me to do the same. With a threatening look, the agent said, "You can never speak of this." He turned to walk away and I asked, "What's a Neff?" He paused momentarily, then walked off. When we returned to Bagram, we did a full debrief. Some spook sat in the corner the entire time to ensure we didn't speak about the giant. After the brief, my commander told me to shower and meet him at the smoke pit in 20 minutes. "Ditch your electronics." Lieutenant Colonel Williams handed me a cigar as I approached the smoke pit. He asked me what I had actually seen on mission and then explained to me that 6 other teams had encountered these giants. Most were less lucky than we were. He informed me that he was trying to figure out what the hell they were, and he did eventually. But that's a story for another day. My first engagement with the giant set off a chain of events that brought me to the truth of those evil beings, and many others. After the mission was over, I was approached by one of the team guys. He removed his hat to reveal a kippa underneath. "Sir, do you want to know what that thing said to you when it charged?" he asked. I nodded without hesitation. "It said, 'Son of Yeshua, I will eat your soul.'" He then looked me in the eye and said, "We've killed dozens of these things. We're figuring out what they are, and it's not good. Head out with us on mission tomorrow, and I'll fill you in." Have you ever heard of the 7 Gates of Hell? It's a hugely popular paranormal site in rural Pennsylvania, surrounded by urban legend and horror stories. I always took it for granted how popular that site was, growing up only 15 miles down the road. But apparently, it's a nationwide phenomenon that some people travel hundreds of miles to visit. Now, I've never been one to believe in the paranormal, and not just ghosts and the like. Anything that didn't have concrete evidence that I could see or feel was hard for me. I was just a logically based person. I'm sure you know the type. My friends, however, were all in that phase of young adulthood that involved needing to find proof of some kind of ghost, demon, or otherworldly entity. We were all sophomores in high school, and our evenings consisted of all sorts of ghost hunting adventures, such as going out into the woods behind Maddie's house and using a pendulum to try to speak with a spirit, using a Ouija board, and even trying to create a makeshift summoning portal out of kitchen supplies. None of it ever really worked. Sure, the pendulum swung, but it was windy, and everyone knows that Ouija boards are just controlled by whoever is touching it wanting to make a spooky scene. I was always there, playing along and having fun, but never truly believing anything. That is why when Kenny brought up going to the 7 gates of hell, I was all for it. Aside from the fact that the thing was dripping in paranormal lore, there was an actual story behind it as well. In the early 1800s, there was an asylum in Helena, Pennsylvania. This was back in the days where those that were admitted were not treated great. I don't need to tell you the things that happened to those admitted into asylums before 1900. One evening, that asylum caught fire and started a blaze for centuries. Due to its location in the middle of the woods, it took fire response teams well over 20 minutes to get to the scene. And by that point, well, there was no point. Most of the occupants of Helena Asylum were burnt alive, and while a few escaped into the forest, many were found dead later in the surrounding area due to the smoke inhalation, starvation, or ripped apart by animals. All quite gruesome deaths. I wanted to see the remnants of the asylum that were allegedly still there past the 6th gate. It was a Friday night when we went, leaving our home at 10 p.m., so that we could try to be at the asylum by 3 a.m., the witching hour. There were 5 of us, Kenny, Maddie, Andrew, Lauren, and myself, all piled into Kenny's single-row pickup truck. "So, what are you guys hoping to find out there?" I asked. I know there were supposedly the ghosts of the asylum inmates, but other than that, I didn't know too much about the lore. You know, the usual. Ghosts, demons, whatever wants to show itself to us, Kenny stated matter-of-factly. At first, Maddie and Lauren actually seemed a little tense, which was strange. This was the kind of thing we did all the time. It was Lauren that spoke next. "Well, it depends on how deep into the woods we get. I heard Anders and Lawrence went by themselves last week, and couldn't even get past the 3rd gate. Said that they started hearing voices and seeing eyes in the woods. Spooked them real good." I suppressed a laugh. Anders and Lawrence were basically the class clowns of our high school, and taking anything they said seriously was almost as much of a joke as whatever they said. "Yeah, and I've heard that if you can make it past the 7th gate, then you get sent directly to hell, never to return," Maddie said, her eyes scanning the woods to our right. "Assuming that hell is real, that is," I chime in, achieving a punch to the arm from Andrew. After about a 45-minute drive, we arrive at the broken-down street sign that says Toad Road, the alleged beacon of where the gates are to start. "Okay, everyone, shut up. You all have your flashlights and knives?" Kenny asked. We had been instructed to bring flashlights for obvious reasons, and knives, I guess, to feel more safe from the ghosts. I know I brought one in case of a coyote, which were more popular in the area than I would like to remember. An actual threat. We all nodded in his direction, signaling our 2 items. "Great, so about an 1/8 of a mile in the forest here should be a rusted gate. That is the 1st gate, and once we cross it, it'll be in the devil's territory," Kenny said, with a smirk on his face. "I hope he's ready." I rolled my eyes and shot a smile at Maddie, who was looking a little bit nervous still. I put my arm around her and whispered to her that everything was going to be alright, and maybe they would finally find something of substance, so we can put this dumb paranormal stuff behind us and move on to the next fad. Kenny would soon turn around and lead us into the woods. It took us about 5 minutes to reach the gate that he had spoken of. I honestly didn't see what the big deal was. It was a little bit strange for the rusted iron gate to be sitting in the middle of the woods, not attached to anything and being overgrown with vines and weeds, but scrap metal is found everywhere. There wasn't a huge significance. The others seemed a mixture of elated and nervous at the same time. "So, what is supposed to happen after we cross?" I ask, preparing myself for the made-up shenanigans I'll be experiencing soon. The first gate isn't much. According to legend, since we are the furthest away from the asylum, there are the least amount of spirits here. They'll likely try to push you around, so you may feel a bit of pressure, but that's about it. Oh, also, our phones will probably go out here. Electronics don't work in the gates, so please stay close. And if you get separated from the group, just go back to the car so you don't get unhelpably lost. I left it unlocked since we are in the middle of nowhere. Kenny banged his flashlight twice on the metal bars of the gate, causing bits of rust to spark into the air around it. Then, with a theatrical performance, he stepped to the other side of the gate. I was next to follow, and then the rest of the group, and unsurprisingly, I felt no different. We walked for a few more minutes and I went to check my phone. It had shut off, which was strange because the battery life had been almost at 80% when we left the car. I guess cell service just doesn't work this far out in the country. So, all of your phones are actually off then? I ask, making sure I'm not the only one. One by one they check, and one by one they agree with me. I'm more concerned about us getting pulled apart from each other than the fact that maybe this could be a paranormal interaction. Maddie's particularly freaked out by this. Guys, I don't know. This feels a little bit too real for me, Maddie said nervously, looking back towards the way we came, probably judging whether the social repercussions of going and waiting in the car and being called a baby inevitably by the rest of the group was worth it. Oh, stop, it's fine. Worst comes to worst, we all die in a poltergeist extravaganza, Kenny said, not helping. We continued walking. The next gate was about a mile deeper, and we weren't moving super quickly. So, Kenny, what is supposed to happen? Ouch! Andrew stopped himself mid-sentence and glanced down at his leg. He pulled up his jeans to mid-calf and revealed a large cut spanning about 4 inches of the backside of his lower leg. What happened? I asked, looking around with the flashlight, attempting to find any thorn bushes or other culprit. I felt the light tapping on my shoulder and turned around to see who it was, only to find no one was there. Maddie, Lauren, and Kenny were all standing next to Andrew, and I was alone where I stood. Okay, weird, I'll admit. I don't know. I was just walking and it hurt. Then this, Andrew said, motioning towards his leg. I mean, it's not that bad. Just unexpected is all. Let's keep going. We made it to the next gate a few minutes later. Only Maddie complaining of feeling like she was getting shoved to the side. She compared it to when you're walking next to someone who is leaning into you. She was scared though, and placebo is a strong thing, especially in the paranormal, so I chose to ignore that. Alright, gate 2 is right here. On the other side of this gate, according to legend, you start feeling as if you're being followed. The pushing continues, only stronger. Oh, and there's a cult that guards the third gate at the end. So you know, watch out for them. Kenny, who had apparently not felt any presences during the first gate, was obviously feeling a little more lighthearted than the rest of the group pressed on without question. It was about halfway through the second gate that we encountered our first problem. Maddie's flashlight died. She swore up and down that she had fresh batteries in it, but nonetheless, we were short one. Maddie huddled close to me and used the light from mine as we continued down the imaginary path that Kenny was leading for us. About a quarter of a mile past the second gate, we heard a scream. I whipped around and saw Lauren on the ground. A wild look in her eyes as she looked back and forth so quickly, I was afraid she might break her neck. We all looked at her inquisitively. I don't know what happened. It felt like someone just spared me, Lauren shouted, panic growing in her voice. I walked over to her and offered her a hand to get up. I'm serious, guys. It felt like I got tackled. I didn't just dive onto the ground and scream for no reason. Lauren shook off my hand and pushed herself up, rejoining us, shock in her face and Andrew's. Kenny clearly didn't believe her, and Maddie looked like she was on the verge of tears. As we walked, I got the increasing sensation that I was being stalked. I began looking around for the signs of a coyote, attributing the sensation to that, but I couldn't see anything that would alert me to the presence of wildlife. In fact, now that I was thinking about it, there was a surprising lack of wildlife altogether. Guys, Hold up for a second. Be quiet, I asked everyone. And they all were happy to oblige. Not that anyone was really talking that much anyway. As everyone stopped, I felt the pit in my stomach start to grow. There wasn't a single noise being made. No crickets, no wind, no leaves cracking in the distance. Complete silence. That's strange, isn't it? The lack of sound. I stated my concerns aloud. I really think we should turn back. That feeling of being shoved down, that was enough for me. I don't want to mess with this stuff anymore. I'm serious. Lauren shivered as she spoke, despite the relatively warm night. Honestly, I'm down to turn around too. It's getting pretty late. Andrew spoke next, his eyes not necessarily frightened, but definitely on edge. Are you all being serious right now? Come on, we drove all the way here. We are not turning back now, Kenny said, his voice dejected. He threw his hands in the air in a fit. No, I think we should keep going. I just thought it was weird is all. I threw back. I felt it again, after I said that. The tapping on my shoulder, as if someone was trying to get my attention but didn't want to speak. I turned my head, knowing there would be nothing there, and not being surprised when there wasn't. How much further to the third gate? It should be right around here. Let's go. Kenny swung his flashlight around and started walking again, not giving anyone else the chance to disagree. After another 2 or 3 minutes, we landed back on the road that appeared seemingly out of nowhere. There was no sound of traffic, obviously, and there was no paint on the road. It just seemed like concrete in the wilderness. The feeling of being watched was almost overwhelming now, and I have to admit, it has started freaking me out a little bit at this point. I could see in the distance another gate sitting at the end of the road. This one felt different though. Maybe it was because it was decidedly less rusted and antique looking, or maybe it was because it was in a place that actually made sense for a gate to go instead of being in the middle of the forest. Somehow, it just felt strange. When we were about 10 yards away from the gate, I heard Maddie start to sob. I turned to ask her what was wrong, and I saw utter terror in her eyes. I will never forget that look. I asked what was wrong, and she couldn't even speak. She just pointed to the sides of the roads. In the darkness where the road dropped off into more grass and trees, sitting just along the edge of our vision were bright green eyes, hundreds of them. It took all of 5 seconds for the rest of our small group to see what Maddie did. Those green eyes, unnaturally bright in the darkness of the forest surrounding them. Lauren let out a shriek, and Andrew just about jumped out of his skin despite not actually making a scream. I swear Kenny actually smiled, as if he was happy to finally have something to talk about. His smile doesn't last. I know he wants to see something metaphysical more than any of the rest of us, but even for him, this felt like more than we bargained for. One by one, what felt like thousands of men stepped out of the shrubbery on either side of the road, each holding some sort of weapon. My heart dropped. Maddie is clinging on to me, her face shoved into my chest, sobbing. Andrew looks distant, like his brain wouldn't allow him to process the situation. Lauren was also crying silent tears, and Kenny had an awful grimace that came from trying to look like he wasn't scared to preserve his social status and actually shitting his pants. The figures were silent as they approached. They were humanoid in shape, but something about them was distinctly wrong. Maybe it was the way they appeared darker than they should have, even as they got closer and our flashlights could reach them. Maybe it was the way they seemed to float instead of walk as they moved, or maybe it was the noise that emitted from them. It was subtle, a small static-like white noise, but it's amazing how loud things sound when you haven't heard noise at all in the last 45 minutes. 3 of the figures maneuvered themselves between us and the third gate, their gaze never breaking from our own. His hands wrapped around what appeared to be a shotgun, the other 2 clutching giant clubs made of wood and scrap metal. "You'll turn around, now!" The voice didn't come from the man with the shotgun, but rather boomed through the air, as if the world itself were speaking to us. Of course, my initial reaction was to turn around and get right the fuck out of there, as was everyone that was sane in our group. Kenny, however, stared forward with more purpose and drive than I've ever seen. He had finally done it. He had contacted and seen with his own 2 eyes something from another world. We all had. However, unlike the rest of us, it hadn't frightened Kenny. It made him want to know more. No, we're gonna keep going. This is public land.
You can't stop us. I don't believe that you'll pull that trigger."
Kenny spoke back to the creatures with a calm precision. He really meant what he was saying, and I couldn't understand how. I fought every urge in my body to turn around and bolt, and I walked forward to put my hand on Kenny's shoulder. "We need to go, man. I don't think these guys are fucking around. We need to go." I put emphasis at the end of the sentence, hoping that my good friend was just in some kind of shock-induced state of overconfidence. I turned him around to look at the rest of us, instead of them.
"Look at Maddie and Lauren."
I pointed at the two girls, the former's head in her hands trying to avoid her surroundings, and the latter sitting down next to Maddie, trying to put on a tough face and hardly succeeding.
"What, do you want to chicken out, just like Anders? This is all just meant to scare us, okay, Daniel? Nothing's gonna happen."
A crack once again pierced the night, and I knew instantly that the shotgun had been fired. I didn't even have time to scream before Kenny was gone. I don't mean gone, as in dead. I mean gone. Ceased to be around. There was no trace of him. One moment he was talking to me, and the next my hand was no longer on the shoulder of my childhood best friend, but rather floating through the air back to my side. The figures were gone too. "Kenny? Kenny?" I shouted into the nothingness. The sound was gone again, along with the creatures, so my voice felt like it would travel miles, but nothing came back. I turned back to everyone else, and they looked as petrified as I was.
"Where is he, Daniel? He was just right there. You had your damn hand on his shoulder. Daniel, where is he?"
Andrew was now in front of me, jabbing his finger into my chest as if somehow I was the one that caused this. I started.
"That is bullshit."
Andrew shoved me hard enough that I stumbled backwards and almost fell over.
"People don't just disappear."
His rage quickly dissipated into worry as he walked over to where Kenny was just a few moments before and dropped to his knees.
We have to leave now. Tell the police what happened. I don't know."
"We can't just abandon him out here, Andrew. We have to keep going."
It was Lauren that spoke this, the steely look on her face much different than the one she was wearing only a minute ago. She was right. If we left right now, Kenny might as well be dead. He still might be dead, but if we keep going, maybe we can find those creatures again and try to strike a deal. There was nothing I wanted more than to leave this forest and never come back. But at this point, we didn't have a choice. Maddie looked up for the first time since the dark men arrived, her entire face red, and tears staining her cheeks. When she spoke, her voice cracked and she sniffed to try to stop her nose from running to no avail.
"I don't want to. I just want to go home."
She was defeated, and I didn't blame her. However, unless she wanted to walk back through the woods alone, she was gonna have to get through it. Kenny needed us.
"I'm sorry, Maddie. I know you're scared. We all are. But we have to do this right now. We have to. We have to."
I repeated it twice, once for Maddie and once for myself. She looked back at me like a little kid being told she was gonna be spanked, but she nodded her head and let out another burst of tears before eventually standing on her own. Without giving myself any more time to think about it, I walked up to the third gate, put my hand on it, and walked around to the other side. The others followed me, if hesitantly. The road that we had been walking on disappeared directly on the other side of the third gate, strangely enough, so we were back to walking through wooded terrain and keeping our eyes out to whatever may lurk in the trees. I had taken point in Kenny's absence, Maddie staying constantly at my side, followed by Andrew and Lauren. We walked in a tight square forward. It was odd, but for some reason, I just knew where to go. It was as if I was being guided, but by a force that was unseen or unfelt. I found myself making turns around certain trees, and crossing over a small stream at one point that would have been much easier to just walk alongside. The tapping that I'd been feeling on my shoulder previously was also getting stronger and harder to ignore. It was persistent now, and the taps were becoming harder and more painful. I could tell that the others were feeling something similar. Even though nothing was being said between them, all three of my companions would occasionally grimace and hold a section of their body, or spin their head to look in a direction that had no calling to it. To their credit, especially poor Maddie, no one said a word. We ventured in silence for about 15 more minutes before we heard a scream. It was off in the distance, maybe 50 yards away I would guess, but with the lack of other sound, it was really hard to tell. Andrew and Lauren started running towards the sound call for help, and I was soon to follow. They were slightly ahead of us, and when we passed into a clearing, the two in front of us stopped on a dime, nearly causing Maddie and I to run straight into their backs. Andrew's hand clapped over his mouth and Lauren turned away to vomit. I looked past them, and saw my own mother being stabbed repeatedly by what I can only describe as a monster. It was pitch black like a shadow, with curled blades for hands and lanky canine-looking legs, bent in directions that didn't make any sense. "Mom!" I screamed, mine almost as blood-curdling as hers. I rushed forward and tried to tackle the creature attacking my mother, but right as I was about to lay into it, it too disappeared right in front of my eyes. I turned to find my mother, but she had been replaced with the face of another, an old man with blood running down his lips, looking at me with a devilish smile. He licked his lips as he stared at me, and then vanished himself. It took me a minute before I could move again. I had no idea what was real. Was this all a hallucination? It couldn't be, because clearly, everyone else saw the same thing as I did. I had no answers, nor any semblance of a clue what to make of the events that had happened. I fought back the urge to scream and vomit, and walked back to our group. "What are we even gonna do, you know? If we find him?" Andrew said, his eyes still trained on the ground where we had just seen two more beings disappear. "We're gonna fucking kill whoever took him." Lauren spoke up. Everything about her turned to ice. It almost made me uncomfortable seeing the sweet, pretty girl, who enjoyed watching makeup tutorials on YouTube and flirting with boys on Twitter, look as hardened and shut off emotionally than it did seeing the spirits. Almost. With a new sense of pace, we started back on the trail. My flashlight flicking back and forth between the trail in front of me and the trees beside me even more often now. And it wasn't long before we reached the fourth gate, or at least I think it was the fourth gate. There actually wasn't a gate at all, but only a prominent mark in the ground, like someone had run their finger through wet concrete and molded it that way. I just knew that it was, however. I knew we were getting deeper into the game, closer to hell, I suppose. I didn't even bother to stop. I just kept walking. The moment I stepped past the gate, I knew I was correct. It felt like it dropped 20 degrees instantly. I also heard sound again, but it wasn't the average forest sounds. It was distant wails that could have been mistaken for a gust of wind in a different situation, but not this one. When Maddie stepped over the line, her face froze and she looked at me. I did my best to smile for reassurance, but I'm sure it wasn't worth much. She put her head back down and pulled her jacket closer around her. "Are we gonna talk about how we made it here? To the fourth gate? With no fucking directions?" Andrew was looking at me, and then pointed back down at the line in the dirt. "I mean, of all the turns we could have taken, all the different routes we could have gone down, this gate is hardly 6 feet long in the forest that's how big? And how the fuck did we even know this was supposed to be a gate? I can't be the only one that just knew." Andrew was ranting, something he did to cope with things. Normally, it was when a guy pissed him off at school by talking to a girl he was interested in, or how his favorite football team lost and it was all on the referees. This time, it was about ghosts that kidnapped and possibly killed our best friend. I don't have an answer. Let's just keep moving, okay? I don't want to stand in one place for too long," I replied. "Fuck this!" Andrew crossed his arms and let out a shiver from the newfound cold, but continued to walk ahead of me. Lauren simply walked by his side and looked straight ahead, focused on an unknown point and mind set only on completing her objective. The further we got into the land of the fourth gate, the harder it was to ignore the background sound to our trek. It was clearly screaming, and it was clearly in the direction we were heading. Then again, I guess we had given up a rational thought the moment we decided to continue further into this damned hell forest instead of turning around and cutting our losses at one of us. I know that may sound fucked up to say, but I'm afraid that even if we make it out of here, our lives will never be the same again. I know mine won't be. I don't really remember when, but at some point, images started flashing through my head. Ones that were not my own. I saw ash and monsters, endless miles of snow, Spiders by the millions crawling along the ground. They were terrifying, and would flash in front of my conscience every couple of minutes for a brief moment. It was distracting. I wanted them to stop, and after a while, started cringing every time I knew I was due for another. As we grew deeper, the visions grew longer. Eventually, it became all I could do to focus on walking straight. My gut instinct was to sit down and close my eyes to try to make it stop. I knew that wouldn't help, but I had the strongest urge to do it anyway. I persisted. I kept moving. I trained my eyes on the back of Andrew's head and grounded myself there. It was in the middle of one of these visions, one where I was flying but my wings were on fire, and I knew that soon I would fall to my death, that I heard Maddie scream again. I snapped back to reality and looked to my right, where she had been stationed all evening. She was gone, but not in the way that Kenny had been gone. This time, there was a trail of blood. I don't think that makes it better.
Please, help.
I followed the voice up a tree and saw Maddie pinned to the trunk, a thick branch penetrating through her stomach. I crossed the distance between us in moments and looked up. She was out of my reach, and her eyes were closing quickly.
Maddie, please, stay with us. We can help.
I yelled up to her, desperately racking my brain for any solution. I whipped around to find Lauren, climbing a dogwood next to the one Maddie was impaled on. Andrew and I looked on helplessly.
I got you, Maddie. I got you.
Lauren's voice was reassuring as she worked her way a good 15 feet off the ground to a crossing point between the two trees. I had forgotten how much of a climber Lauren had been in elementary school. It felt like ages ago, but it sure as hell was useful now. Lauren reached over and made the jump. Maddie followed her lazily, a drunken haze settling over her whole body. Lauren began to slowly climb down the level our friend was at, and cradled at her head. She then looked back down at us and shook her head. There was nothing we could do.
You have to try, Lauren. Please get her down.
I begged. I couldn't handle another loss. Lauren grimaced, and did the only thing that could possibly save her. She broke the branch as close to Maddie's body as she could, and she pulled her off. I'm not sure, actually, if she managed to pull her the whole way off the tree branch. It wasn't long after Lauren touched her. Maddie disappeared into thin air.